The story begins with a man sitting down wearing red glasses. He finishes telling Theodore Miller that he could never become a mage. Reflections of light danced in front of him, spreading across the room. Meanwhile, he walked toward the exit in silence. Already outside, he raised his gaze to the sky as if searching for answers. He proceeded with firm, determined steps toward the arena. There his opponent was already waiting for him. In position, they stared at each other, preparing for the imminent battle. He activated his ability, engulfing himself in blazing flames. Then he clenched his fist tightly, showing his determination. Thus begins the clash between him and Sylvia. A sudden wave of dust covered his vision, making him flinch. That curtain of dust hindered his movements. Suddenly blue lights shone intensely in front of him. They surrounded him, forming a magical prison around him. Drops of water began to touch his face, leaving cold trails. Sensing the danger, he jumped backward at the exact moment something approached. Still in midair, he was swallowed by a fluid mass resembling water. Trapped inside it, he began to struggle desperately to survive. Soon after, his body was violently thrown out, but there was no time to breathe as he was attacked again. With no chance to react, finding himself cornered, he immediately called for his support. Mithra then appeared as a small magical being and sprang into action. With a gesture, she raised a wall of rocks. Using her ability, Sylvia watched everything from a distance, analyzing the situation carefully. A yellow flash intensified amid the smoke, catching the girl's attention. She furrowed her brows, not quite understanding what was about to happen. Meanwhile, he extended his fingers as if wielding a weapon, and fired through the opening in the wall. With precision, the flash grew even stronger, lighting up the entire arena. The shot surged at incredible speed, heading straight for Sylvia. She tried to raise her weapon to defend against the strike. However, her guard had already been completely broken. With no time to react, she was hit directly. He was shocked to see the impact of the attack. The ensuing explosion devastated almost the entire battlefield. The audience watched in shock, unable to grasp what had just happened. Despite the damage caused, Sylvia reappeared unscathed amidst the debris. With dust still hanging in the air, she could barely see what was around her. Even so, if she could make out a silhouette emerging ahead. Looking up, she saw Sylvia activating a new ability. She raised her staff, aiming at him with precision and coldness. He, without hesitation, responded with his firepower. Even without an immediate reaction, Sylvia carefully observed his movements. Meanwhile, he raised both hands ready to strike back, and at the same time they both unleashed their magic and direct clash. The scene shifts, showing the man with glasses asking why he made that choice. The boy looked back and firmly replied that he wanted to be a mage. Outside the laboratory room, absolute silence reigned inside. The young man waited with crossed arms, expressionless while reviewing two documents. The man asked if he knew why he had been called. Turning his head calmly, the boy replied that he did. The man explained that he lost 3 points in each subject. Despite minor mistakes, the score was nearly perfect. Even so, he lamented that this wasn't enough for the young student. The boy listened, as the professor stated that the school was focused on magic, and a written exam couldn't make up for a practical failure. The next scene showed the school's exterior, revealing how insane and grand it was. As he walked, he wondered if he would really be able to graduate from that place. Interrupting his thoughts, the doctor asked what magic circle he was in. With his head down, the boy answered that he was still in the second circle. The professor pointed out that 5 years had already passed, and he hadn't even mastered that level. He just nodded in silence, feeling the weight of disappointment. The doctor declared that, unfortunately, there was nothing more he could do for him. Even though he had known this for a while, he still felt the pitiful stares wherever he went. The professor extended an envelope and warned that only 1 year remained. He apologized, saying he had wasted all the previous years. Knowing he had reached his limit, he accepted the letter without arguing. As he left the room, he thought that reality had never played in his favor. He looked around and saw nearby people mocking his situation. They all ended up laughing in his face with no shame at all. Frustrated, he crumpled the letter and silently wished they would stop. Even though he tries to ignore it, he has no choice but to walk through them. His anger grows along with the desire to get away from those mockeries. With eyes burning with determination, He decides to isolate himself so he won't hear anything else. As he climbs the stairs, he reflects on walking a path full of thorns. With no other options, he firmly opens the door in front of him. There he imposes on himself the role of someone willing to face life seriously, with studying as his only escape. In front of him are books he's read countless times. He wonders what the point is in repeating it all over again. Even so, he feels a certain relief knowing the library is almost always empty. Located at Bergen Academy, it's a quiet place where he may have already read every available book, but something unusual catches his attention. At that moment he sees a strange book, and wonders if he had ever noticed it before in that library. Sure that he hadn't, he reaches out curiously to touch it. The moment he does, something resembling a symbiote grabs his finger. A monster with an unpleasant appearance materializes in front of him. Completely terrified, he can't understand what he's seeing. Before he can scream for help, everything around him falls into silence. Time passes without anything happening until a voice whispers his name. He hears the voice asking if he can hear it. Seeing no one, his only reaction is to assume he's hallucinating. When he raises his right hand, the voice returns, now asking him to raise the left. Looking down, he notices something strange on his hand. Confused, he slowly raises it to examine it more closely. Surprised, he wonders what that transformation is. The creature then says that maybe now he'll be able to survive hearing this. He screams in fear while the voice tries to calm him down, telling him not to panic. Watching the protagonist with a look of shock, she repeated to herself that it was still too early for that kind of reaction. She wondered if that creature was able to speak, not understanding what kind of purple tentacle she was holding in her hand. With its tongue stretched out, the creature announced that it was hungry. Catching his attention upon noticing that, he froze, standing stiffly. Shortly after, he flailed his arm violently and began to scream. He saw the creature grabbing a book with its tongue. At that, he asked it to stop grabbing the creature's tongue. He insisted that it just listen to him. Resting on his fingers, the creature declared it was in pain. Because of that, it demanded to be released. A sharp pain knocked him to the ground with a heavy thud. With a stunned expression, he thought an immense amount of knowledge had just invaded his mind. Sparks flickered around his face, caused by intense flows of aura. When he opened his eyes, he began to form a thought, but was interrupted by a voice in his mind, ordering him to extend his hand forward. Focusing completely, he realized that everything he had fought for was finally happening. With his mouth slightly open, he shouted a lightning spell. Suddenly, a thunderous explosion echoed through the library. For a moment, he stood in shock. Still motionless, he watched sparks of aura emerging from his own hand. System notified him that the second spell of the lightning circle had been learned. Overwhelmed, he heard a voice declare that after a long slumber, gluttony had awakened, starving. Turning toward the creature, he tried to confirm if that voice belonged to it. The system informed him there were only 10 minutes left, and that 4 books would be needed to fully satisfy the creature. Lost in thought, he wondered what exactly they were talking about. Looking at his hand, he realized that, before thinking more about the voice, he had to understand what kind of being he was dealing with. With his hand resting on his knee, he felt a slight tingling, suggesting that this wasn't a dream. He remembered that, until that moment, he hadn't been able to use magic, and couldn't understand why it was now working. Extending his hand forward, he suspected it might have been an accident. While wondering if he could destroy an entire bookshelf with a single strike, seeing his scorched hand, he concluded that it was all thanks to the creature that fed on books. A genuine smile appeared on his face, because he was sure this was his chance. With his hand resting on the floor, he thought about the words he'd heard. If he absorbed 4 books in 10 minutes, something like the lightning would happen again. With his hand on his shoulder, he thought he might be able to absorb and use the abilities contained in books, as if they were his own. Casting a glance at the little monster, he tried to learn its name, but it said it would only reveal it after being fed. Tilting his head slightly, he asked what would happen if he didn't, and she declared that she would devour the first person she found. At that, an ironic smile formed on his face. Leaning on the wooden handrail, he began to explore the surroundings of the library, determined to move forward. As he observed the creature, he commented that he had offered it food for some time. He noticed it was trying to say something, and had learned many useful things from the mysterious voice. He revealed that gluttony was an ancient grimoire from a forgotten era, capable of amplifying its user's power while satisfying its own hunger. He remarked that the book's devour granted power, but warned that if ignored, the grimoire would start devouring even its master's honor. He stated that the essence of the process was to feed, in order to gain strength, as absorbing a book would instantly transfer its knowledge. He felt magical power spreading through his body, starting from the heart and flowing through his blood vessels to every extremity. He reflected on the complexity of the reading process, highlighting that if the reader's comprehension was limited, the content would become useless or confusing. Closing his eyes, he was notified by the system that elemental energy had been absorbed. Another notification indicated harmony with 4 main elements. Only 3 books were still missing. With a keen look, he interpreted the notification as a sign of successful assimilation. Concluding that the book's abilities were now within his reach, he remarked that he would continue absorbing spells until the end of the day. However, life isn't a bowl of cherries. After absorbing an excessive number of spells, he ended up suffering a matching pain. Clutching his head tightly, he let out a desperate scream. Drenched in sweat, he murmured that he was about to faint. With his hand on his forehead, he concluded that he needed to consume books more cautiously, though he admitted the pain was worth the effort and focus. Soon after, he began practicing until a cluster of powerful aura formed in his palm as he clenched his fists. He was surprised by a new message from the system. Grimoire's hunger had finally been satisfied. With his arms open, he turned to the message, stating that the knowledge of the absorbed books had been fully mastered. His face lit up with a genuine smile. He drifted into thought. It was the first time magical power flowed freely through his body. Looking at the creature, he tried to find out if it was satisfied, and it replied that it wasn't that bad. Still staring at it, he called it picky and asked if they had forgotten the promise made. With a smile, the creature wanted to know if all he wanted was a name. Leaning on his own arm, he confirmed that was enough, but it remarked that he didn't seem greedy. Opening its mouth, it said it could be called gluttony. With a hand on his face, he showed that he understood. The little monster laughed and commented on his bitter expression. His thought was whether it would answer his question. Watching him, Gluttony assumed the doubt was about the things he could do. With a mischievous smile, she declared she knew many things. Seeing her stick out her tongue, he concluded that Gluttony's reliable voice was still unstable, and there was no definite answer about its stabilization. While holding the creature in his hand, he knew he'd have to unravel everything on his own. With his face marked by surprise, he realized there was no way to learn more about the little monster. He reported that after its hunger was satisfied, the grimoire would fall into a deep sleep, and afterward would be able to answer any question. His face froze. At the exact moment he was thinking about what he should ask. Extending his hand, he explained that Gluttony was an ancient magical grimoire, and thus presumed it hadn't lied when it said it would answer his question. Noticing his suspicious gaze, the grimoire asked what he was thinking, urging him to ask quickly before it fell asleep. The system announced that, before the entity called Gluttony fell asleep, he would be granted only one question. Facing the mini-demon, he reflected in silence. Resting on the arm of the chair, he knew that chance wouldn't come again anytime soon, so he decided to begin with the most important question. Raising his hand toward Gluttony, he asked what its existence was. The creature answered with its tongue out, saying it was something difficult to explain, and questioned whether he'd be able to understand. Upon hearing that, the humble boy's face twisted with anger. Gluttony, upon observing him, understood it would have to come down to his level to convey the information more visually. His expression turned into pure perplexity as he tried to make sense of what was happening. Suddenly the library walls were covered in cloths of red mana. Down to the chair his arms were grabbed by mysterious tentacles. Frozen, he watched the tentacles spread. Standing up, his expression was one of complete astonishment. He ended up seeing Gluttony peeking from the depths of that strange technology. His arms and legs were being slowly wrapped by the tentacles, while in the background the monster approached. Shocked, he saw his body being pulled toward the creature. Eyes wide, he couldn't grasp the complexity of that form. The monster drew nearer, increasingly threatening. Suddenly, Gluttony came to a complete stop. As he opened his mouth, his tongue began moving toward the boy. Unfortunately, he now takes the thread to the forehead. At that moment, a powerful impulse surged through his being, surpassing even his rational capacity. With his mouth slightly open, he exhaled deeply. Knowledge seemed to have taken over him. The chair gave out from the pressure, making him fall hard to the floor. Gluttony, observing the boy lying down, warned that he shouldn't be fooled by her appearance. Still in shock, he heard the grimoire say that this was the current limit of his capabilities, and that the answer given was enough for now. The entity said goodbye, saying they would meet again. Still on the ground, he clenched his fist, admitting that he didn't truly know the grimoire's nature, and that describing the creature was nearly impossible. Knowing that such an existence couldn't be explained by current language, he thought he wasn't her first host. Leaning against the chair, he acknowledged that there were still many doubts about the grimoire's magic. Looking at his own hand, he realized Gluttony had not yet fully awakened, and that the voice was only a guide. In his mind, he pictured the creature devouring a book, and concluded she awakened once a day to satisfy her hunger and answer a single question. Examining his hand, he understood that Gluttony could sense the wielder's potential, unlocking a power beyond any regular spell. He raised his hands and revealed the grimoire absorbed the essence of the devoured items, becoming more effective as the user's understanding grew. With a smile on his face, he clenched his fist again. Elated, he felt it finally sinking in. After all, he was just a student without magical skills, dismissed by everyone. But now his years of dedication to magic finally made sense. Sitting on the library floor, he smiled as he sank into his thoughts. Looking at his own palm, he declared that he would absorb everything in his path. Sounds began echoing near the Academy's tall tower. The students, exchanging curious looks, were restless. One of them ran through the corridors, until a staff member interrupted him with claps, reminding him that running on school grounds was forbidden. Meanwhile, professors tended to the plants in the courtyard. One of them was curious about the students' commotion, and the other commented that it reminded him how youth was the best phase of life. The mustached one, looking down at his own bulging belly, joked that maybe studying liches again wasn't such a bad idea. The four-eye professor asked if he knew that liches had no joints, which is why they couldn't even stand properly. The chubby professor turned his eyes back to Vince, and asked if he had decided to stay at the academy during the break. With a coffee mug in hand, Vince admitted he had too much to do, and that the chaos at the beginning of the year kept him from handling anything. The bearded, chubby man took another sip and sank into cautious thoughts. Meanwhile, he tried to understand if Vince was referring to something more, his eyes behind his glasses fixed on his colleague. Vince replied that it didn't seem like the right moment for that kind of conversation, and asked if the other agreed. Because of that, all the other professors listening realized they'd been caught eavesdropping. Soon after, one professor stood up from his desk. He approached Vince and said he hadn't seen him in days. Vince's gaze was enigmatic, smiling. The other asked why he was being looked at that way, admitting he was uncomfortable, and said he just wanted to ask a few questions. Vince continued drinking his coffee, waiting calmly with a sly smile. The stranger said it would only take a few minutes. Vince stared at the mysterious visitor. His hands in his pockets, he seemed ready to clarify something. Pausing mid-motion as he raised his mug to his lips, he froze. The stranger mentioned Theodore Miller, and suggested he wasn't expelled this year. Vince, perplexed, stopped drinking and looked down. At that moment, he began to question the boy. He concluded that despite Miller's knowledge, he failed in practice and exams. So he wondered what that knowledge was really worth. He stated that the student needed to understand his limits, and revealed that he had allowed Theodore to stay for another year. With a serious expression, he said that the professor must guide the student down the right path. The stranger, surprised, said he needed to compile a list of people and then apologize. He suggested a mistake had been made and wished good luck. Before leaving, Vince watched the man walk away. Still stunned that he was a teacher, his eyes turned to the academy's window. While he remained lost in thought, A smile appeared on his face, and he found himself beginning to believe in the boy's future. Theodore carried a stack of documents, then placed them on the desk and tried to catch his breath. Sitting down, he decided to begin, and so he used his evaluation with one of the many books. He realized that, after receiving the magical assessment, choosing books had become easier. With a thoughtful look, he says that by touching the book, he receives all the necessary information. Observing the library, he notes that thanks to gluttony, he acquired the ability to identify food with benefits, even without reading it. Clutching the book in his hand, he says his memory has improved significantly. Looking at the sleeping magical grimoire, he gives thanks for all of this. Turning back to gluttony with a surprised look, he asks her to wake up and eat. The magical grimoire opens its mouth and says, it needs 3 books to feed. He notes that the creature's appetite is astonishing. Additionally, sometimes it expresses its desires. He observes that if he doesn't use the evaluation skill, the grimoire doesn't even glance at the book with a worried look. He thinks about the abilities he has gained through gluttony. The grimoire tries to call Theodore, who realizes that checking each book has become a habit. The grimoire's face is wrapped in genuine malice, and it states that even though this is the 5th book, gluttony hasn't even licked it. The creature declares that he is a disappointment, and asks for something tastier. Looking at the 2nd book, gluttony notes that it's very strong. The boy places his hand over the red book. That's when he realizes the seal belongs to the Balance family. He uses his evaluation and tries to communicate with the book. Closing his eyes with a shocked look, he says that this book is original. He reveals that the author of the book Ballistic Magic is Alfred Balance, the Prince of Balance. Extending his hand, the prince freezes as Theodore states that before receiving the title, he was the greatest mage. An aura continues to emanate from Alfred's hands. It resembles a bow with an arrow focusing. The prince takes a deep breath, pulling the bow even further. Nearly ready to release the shot, he channels the power into the tip of his finger, into the palm of his hand, and waits for the right moment to fire. Peak of energy rises. The guards near the castle notice the prince's powerful technique. Alfred's magic missile pierces the body of one of the knights. With a successful shot, the prince freezes, waiting for the next move. Then, the guards announce a long-range attack and the death of the general. Alfred watches the scene and reports the mission complete. With the prince's finger pressed to his lips, Theodore states that the magic used was shaped like an arrow, and that Alfred reached the highest rank through hard work. The boy is left with a shocked expression. He can't believe such a rare book was collecting dust on the shelves. He says that if he were caught holding it, it would be a problem. However, the book is incredibly valuable. Handing the book to the grimoire, he asks it to begin the meal. After eating, Gladney's face is covered with a satisfied smile. The grimoire declares that this book was worth it, and mentions synchronization. Cautiously, Theodore tries to figure out what it's talking about. Suddenly, he stumbles to the side surprise, then begins to fall into an unknown abyss. At the bottom of the abyss, Gluttony's jaws become visible. The system reports that the Dark Ward is suitable for synchronization. The system states that Theodore Millard is currently synchronizing. With the author's memory, the magical grimoire prepares to eat, and the system declares that the world now seems to belong to the author of the book. They will follow the memories of Alfred Balance, and then sounds from deep within Gluttony can be heard. After Theodore is inside, the grimoire shuts its mouth tightly. A clot of magical energy heads toward the center of the city. The man's face is covered by windswept hair from the powerful gusts. Opening his eyes, he freezes. Then the story takes us back about 45 years, to the front lines of the Principality of Balance. In darkness, the sound of horse hooves echoes as clouds of dust rise. A blond man with his eyes closed appears. Then he opens his honey-colored eyes, glowing under the sun. The protagonist is transported into a book that describes events from 45 years ago, where knights are led by a blond man. A girl in a white mage hat approaches the leader, Prince Alfred, and informs him of a nearby enemy detachment now in the body of a man. He mentally questions whether he's truly on a battlefield. Alfred smiles as he observes the enemies moving faster than expected. Seated on his horse, the observer wonders where he is and realizes he cannot move. He concludes that he's merely seeing someone else's memories. 2 mounted men look in his direction, and he realizes he's in the body of the general of the first detachment. A man with a white scarf turns to Alfred. He asks permission to lead the front line as his sword. The blond man closes his eyes, rings a hand to his chin thoughtfully, then laughs and declines the offer. With a smile, he confidently announces that he himself will lead the troops. Wearing brown gloves, he reaches for the sword's hilt and decides to draw. He raises his blade to the sky with a joyful smile, then charges ahead of the army. The prince's detachment thrust their long spears forward and charges into battle, kicking up more dust beneath the hooves. The enemy army also advances. Lowering their spears, a fierce battle erupts between both sides, with horses and riders falling. An enemy on a gray horse raises his sword and approaches from behind another knight. Sensing the imminent attack, the warrior turns sharply and spots the opponent. The two foes clash, trying to stab each other as their horses rear up. Not far away, several other combatants fight fiercely. The battle is in full swing. With sword in hand, the prince runs past the soldiers surrounded by a crimson mist. A brown-gloved hand yanks the reins. Suddenly, under a blood-red sky, the brown horse halts and the general of the army shouts that Alfred Balance has appeared before the enemy. He loudly declares that if any fool among them wishes to take his head, let them come and fight. After those words, the prince, standing alone at a distance, begins to be surrounded. An enemy knight in a red cloak appears. A formidable knight, Count Jason, Richard's son, turns with disdain and asks if they really underestimated him. Seeing such contempt, the man begins to walk toward Alfred. Richard notes that the guy even threw away his weapon and calls him a lunatic obsessed with books. At those words, the prince's eyes shine. Seated atop the brown horse, the blonde leaves behind only a hole. The opponent crashes to the ground, with his horse engulfed in a cloud of dust. The warriors eye the leader cautiously. Some knights raise their swords. A crowd of enemies begins to attack, pointing sharp weapons at him. With a crooked smile, the prince points his index finger at the opponents. A bolt of lightning appears. Several bolts shoot from his fingers, each one targeting a different soldier. The onlooker witnesses the madness. With enemies scattered across the battlefield, he concludes the prince wields a completely different level of magic. He thinks the blonde has such power that he could pierce right through the enemy. The mustached man shouts, demanding they take their hands off him. Surrounded by two guards, the prince sits relaxed on the red throne. Prisoner continues to scream desperately as he's dragged away by two knights, with his upper body bare. The mustached man furiously declares himself the conqueror of Astra. Belfort, he threatens his captors, saying his social status isn't something to be trifled with. The prince stares at him in surprise and asks ironically if it's true that he completed his mission. Astro kneels before him, and the blonde decides to make clear who stands before him. Rising with eyes full of rage, he declares that he is nothing more than a criminal. Pointing his finger at Astro, the man, drenched in cold sweat, begins to mumble. Panicking with wide eyes, he watches as a magical spark appears at the tip of the finger. He tries to justify himself, claiming he wasn't the one who started the war. On his knees, the Marcus begs for mercy, but his plea is cut short. Alfred beheads him using a magical technique. With distaste, he realizes the criminal's blood is splattered everywhere. Even on his face, he closes his eyes in disgust, saying that now a man's blood is all over the place. Turning with a raised finger, he orders Marcus Astro's body to be burned. Such a criminal does not deserve a burial. He pauses for a moment, staring at a man watching everything, leaving the other stunned. Looking around, he finds the prince, saying he must return. He rolls his honey-colored eyes, concluding that the answer to the boy's question lies elsewhere. Continuing to walk away, the blonde states that this is beyond his vision, and asks him to try to find the answer on his own. Turquoise signal appears, indicating that synchronization with Alfred Balance is complete. Sitting in a chair, Theodore falls backward with a stunned expression, crashing loudly to the floor. Thinking about the hero's words from the book, he raises his hand to his face and starts peeking through his fingers. Getting up from the fallen chair, he reflects on his immersion in the book and feels something strange, but useful lying back on the chair. He uses his coat as a pillow. Still thinking about the synchronization, he raises his hand absent-mindedly, excited to realize he can use Alfred's magic missile. But something is wrong, very wrong. The spell is still active in his hand. He doesn't know what to do. He looks at it in horror, unable to figure out how to stop the magic. Then a massive explosion lights up everything around him, like a sun rising in the middle of the night. He opened his mouth and furrowed his brow, surprised by the energy coming from his own hand. The magical flow wouldn't stop, and his eyes widened as he noticed it lying on the fallen chair. He saw the energy explode violently. The building wall was destroyed by the impact, and shards scattered everywhere. The gaping hole exposed the beams. Pieces of wood fell onto his face. The ceiling had collapsed, and his outstretched arm now trembled from the blast recoil. He got up with difficulty, then sat cross-legged on the same fallen chair. He stared at his own palm in fear, reflecting on what he felt. He had already mastered the second circle, but still lacked magical power. That's when he remembered gluttony. At that moment the black essence awakened in his palm. The creature eagerly awaited a new request. With a firm voice he asked how he could increase his magical power. Gluttony narrowed her eyes, surprised by the direct question. Excited, he wanted to know why she had never talked about this before. The reply came with sarcasm. She said his questions were always vague. Frustrated, he asked what he had said. Without fear, the creature simply repeated, calling him an idiot according to her. There were hundreds of methods, but she could only teach one. He was shocked to hear that he listened to everything, while sweating with excitement. Now he rephrased the question, clearly wanting to know what the most effective method was. Gluttony smiled with wide eyes. It was exactly what she had been waiting to hear. A screen appeared, indicating that the essence extraction limit had been increased. Now he could satisfy it even while asleep, absorbing item abilities and increasing magical power. The screen showed that magical objects were capable of increasing the user's power, could also consume cursed items without any issue. Placing his thumb on his face, he became pensive about the new possibilities he wanted to confirm. So he asked if it wouldn't be limited to just books. Gluttony gave a wide smile, as if realizing that her master had finally understood. But there was a problem. Artifacts at the academy were protected. Each item had a guardian, unlike books which were left unguarded. He sighed as he covered his face, thinking about the thousands of items in that place. Suddenly an idea sparked in his mind. He jumped to his feet. He walked over to the open window, where the curtains danced with the wind. He looked out over the vast lands of the academy that opened before him at that moment. He decided he would find answers outside those walls. Professor Vince observed him as he handed over a pass. With a gloved hand, he took the document with both hands. Then he thanked him with a faint smile. Before he left, Vince called out to him with a thoughtful look. He wanted to know if he had changed his mind about becoming a mage. Clenching his fists, he showed conviction. Vince insisted, saying there were other professions where he could shine as well. He mentioned education as an example, trying to make him reconsider. But he didn't hesitate. His path was already set. Even with the professor's silence, he turned his head and spoke firmly. He said the reason was simple. He wanted to become a mage with his hands in his pockets. He said he knew how that sounded, but promised to prove his worth. Vince lowered his head, hiding his face in his gloved hands. He called him a brat, but gave a mischievous smile as he asked if he already had a plan. The scene cuts to the academy gates. He handed his permit to the guards. One of them checked the papers and said everything was in order. The blond man gave a suspicious glance and reminded him he had to be back by 7 p.m. He agreed without arguing, while the other guard pushed the giant gate. Wearing brown boots, he descended the steps. Observing the landscape, he commented that the city hadn't changed at all in 3 years. Bergen was still the commercial center where everything could be found, thanks to magic. Just by walking, he was approached by 4 different artifact shops. He refused them all as he was tired inside today. He could come for a different reason. Turning sharply at a block, he left the busy street, heading toward the outskirts. Walking down a narrow alley, he remembered being there 3 years ago. Back then he was with someone he wanted to forget. However, now his mission was different. He emerged onto a stone path by the river. He ended up spotting a bridge in the distance. He thought the only thing that had changed was himself. The memories of happy days and his old innocence made him nostalgic for a moment, but he quickly rejected the past. Those people didn't matter anymore. They had left him behind, and now he would move forward. Then he stopped in front of a building. He looked up and carefully read the sign above the entrance. He tilted his head to decipher the written word shortly after. He pushed the memories away with determination. He pulled the handle. He entered the shop quickly, then ended up closing the door behind him. In the hallway, he saw a blonde woman with a large purple hat. He asked if the shop was open. The elegant woman seated with a pipe answered with a mysterious air. As she lifted the brim of her hat, she recognized him with a curious look. He tried to ask about an item, but she said she was too lazy to explain. With a bored look, she told him to search on his own. He didn't expect much, so he wasn't disappointed. He knew that in shops like these, it was common to hide information about the items. Looking around, he thought it was a game of luck. He could come out winning or completely screwed. He fixed his eyes on gluttony, remembering that he now had an advantage with. It was like taking a test. With a cheat sheet, he could evaluate everything. The creature. Gluttony evaluates the old iron sword, moves on to a saber, and then examines a 300-year-old magic eye. The object still contains traces of mana. A magic circle begins to glow in his hand the moment he activates. Gluttony surprised. He closes his fist as he closely observes the details in report. He thinks most of the items are old, but some are worth gold with a full bag. He takes everything to the blonde vendor, leaving her completely shocked. She smiles in surprise and says it will all cost 2 gold coins. He complains, saying that in any thrift shop, he paid 20 silvers for all that. The woman in purple stares at him with mischief and suggests he buy it there. Then he replies with a smile, saying that normally everything would go just like that. The vendor, confused, asks if he's some kind of special buyer. She picks up a magic pipe and proposes a challenge. She wants him to identify the item. He stands still for a second, then grabs the peace pipe. He analyzes the item using gluttony, which begins the reading. Looking at her, he reveals it's a magic pipe that doesn't need tobacco. He also says it's the only item she has a true emotional attachment to. The woman is surprised, hides her gaze under the hat, and asks if he's an appraiser. He tries to keep up the act, placing a hand on his chest with forced confidence. Even nervous, he pretends to have appraisal abilities in case something goes wrong. She smiles, saying it had been a long time since someone intrigued her like that. The curtains tremble as they close. The door is locked so they won't be interrupted. Taking advantage of the moment, she picks up a new pipe. The owner sits down with elegance and takes a slow drag. She looks directly at him and asks what kind of transaction he's proposing. One finger raised, he says it's a simple deal. Curious, she asks what it would be. The young man smiles and explains that he wants to appraise items in exchange for keeping the defective ones. The woman widens her eyes and starts sweating at the bold proposal. She takes another drag, trying to keep calm, and says that's nonsense. Even with her hesitation, he insists that the deal benefits them both. The vendor lowers her head and says that's not the real issue. She looks in the eyes and states that his condition is strange and troubling. When he tries to explain, she interrupts, demanding complete honesty. Hence she claims that no real appraiser would accept such a deal, accusing him of deception. With a furrowed brow, she demands a true explanation. She crosses her legs, raises her hand, and offers him one last chance to respond. Lost in thought, he realizes he can't tell the truth about gluttony. He also understands that lying could ruin everything permanently. Desperate, he closes his eyes. Suddenly he has a brilliant idea. He leans forward, preparing to give his answer. Confident, the woman asks if he'll stay silent, but is immediately interrupted. Curious, she asks if he has something to say. He looks at her and calmly says a single phrase, a coercive contract. Surprised, she watches him with her eyes partially hidden under the hat. He asks if she has something like that, but she just stares at him in silence. Sweating cold, she asks if he's being serious. Standing up with a sigh, she says, "This is simply depressing." She walks past him without saying a word. Soon she opens a drawer and reveals a red paper contract. She hands over the packet and asks if he's really going to justify that absurd proposal. Without waiting for an answer, she says if he's that sure, then forget what was said. But then she wants to know his name. He says his name is Theodore, or just Theo. Finally, she reveals her name, Canis, manager of Friendo store. She reads the document with a smile and says, that's reason enough to accept Theo. Asked to add one more clause to the agreement. Canis raises her eyebrows and curiously asks what it would be. With seriousness, He says he wants total confidentiality about everything. She smiles and assures him that with her name on the contract, no one else will ask questions. Then she hands him the document and asks for his fingerprint. Both touch the red paper at the same time, making energy flow between their fingers. Laughing, Canis says it's done now and that she trusts him with her life. She crosses her arms and asks if he's going to carry all of that by himself. He starts sweating, saying he didn't come by carriage. Anis offers help, but he refuses, saying he can handle it. She smiles strangely as she watches him leave with a giant backpack. Even exhausted, he decides that if getting there was easy, going back will be too. His face shows the weight on his back. Arriving at the academy running, a guard watches his approach with confusion. Theo crosses through the nearly closing gates and collapses on the ground. The confused guard asks if he has permission to enter at that hour. He just extends Vince's document while still lying on the ground. The guard skips the check and hurries to help him up. The scene cuts to the dormitory lit by the late afternoon sun. With a white towel around his neck, he ends up sitting down completely exhausted. Reflecting on the day, he feels he got exactly what he needed. Now it's time to feed Gluttony, who slept in his palm. He furrows his brow, trying to wake the lazy little creature. Gluttony wakes up excited and asks if he took a bath, because he seems different. Annoyed, he replies that tonight's dinner will be special. Frightened and curious, Gluttony prepares for what's coming. Theo holds a yellow magic pendant that will be the meal of the day. The creature gulps it down in one jump. He gets excited by the item's different taste. The system announces that the magical energy is weak and will take 3 minutes to process. Leo observes, surprised by the speed and smoothness of the absorption. With a worried look, he wonders if something will happen. A magic circle spins as blue liquid drips into Gluttony's darkness. The screen announces that assimilation has been successfully completed. Theo's chest glows blue, signaling the awakening of a new power. The system reveals that first circle magic mastery has been increased. He feels the mana boiling inside him as if it's about to overflow. A strange sensation takes over his body. This time, without pain, the process feels natural, as if it had always been part of him. He looks at the next item, realizing how different it is from devouring books. With a smile on his face, he feels the sun gently warming his skin. Then he handed over all 15 items to Gluttony, who devoured them one by one without leaving a trace. With each absorption, the number of abilities grew, while the creature's hunger gradually decreased. The magical energy accumulated in his body surpassed the limit of the second circle. Then his heart began to race, starting to expand subtly. Even as he slept, he was consumed by the intense desire to reach the next magical level. In that state, he drew a new, larger circle around the previous one, carefully carving the lines of the world tree. The intention was to break the connections of the previous circles and create something new. The magical lines engraved in his heart began to emit a bright glow. Frowning, he tried to hold on a little longer. With clenched teeth and firm fists, he remained determined to complete the circle as soon as possible. The white light in his chest only grew, illuminating the magical process from within. The long winter break was coming to an end. The return to classes marked a new cycle. Along the trails opened in the snow, he walked steadily toward the academy, facing the wind that scattered flakes at high speed, moving with a steady rhythm. He kept his elbows bent and without hesitation counted 40 full laps. His feet kicked up snow forcefully with each step, clearing a path through the frozen ground. Upon reaching the center of the white desert, he squatted briefly to catch his breath. Shortly after, he stood up, determined, and began another round of push UPS. Not letting the cold win, 11 push UPS were completed quickly, even with sweat running down his face. Soon after, the count had already reached 199 and his muscles were trembling. The last one, the 200, was done with a final effort. In a gesture of exhausted triumph, he collapsed into the snow, panting, proclaiming the achievement with silent pride. 2 months passed and the snow kept falling around him, mirroring the dedication of someone transformed by his synchronization. With Alfred, magical discipline taught an essential truth. A healthy mind requires an equally strong body. The first training sessions were brutal, but his body gradually started to respond. The water from the shower poured in a steady stream, creating comforting sounds after intense training. During the shower, the young man reflected on the solid presence of the third circle in his heart. As he turned the faucet, He clearly realized he had finally reached where he wanted to be. With a towel around his waist, he crossed his arms, and understood he would reach the average level of his class. His flushed cheeks gave him away when he began sneezing repeatedly. The chill warned him cold had taken hold of his body. Despite the discomfort, he acknowledged the relief of being seated on the warm couch. Reclining in the armchair, he let out muffled complaints about the extreme fatigue he felt. Suddenly he opened his eyes upon hearing distant sounds, his sharpened senses reacting to the slightest sign. Footsteps were approaching the entrance, muffled by brown dress shoes. A trio was drawing near a dark-skinned boy, a determined redhead and their arrogant leader. The group's commander noticed the veteran sleeping on the couch, and recognized him with disdain. The redhead cast a judgmental look, stating that this was no place to rest. With one eye half open, the young man observed the trio approaching with unfriendly intentions. The leader mocked the idea of growing old without finishing school, threatening his reputation. With a venomous smile, he demanded that the other get off the couch immediately. As he touched the back wrist, sparks of energy ran down his arm like a sudden electric shock. The impact made him recoil, surprised by the magical defense that had been activated. Before he could understand what had happened, the attacker collapsed, eyes rolled back, and mouth agape. His companions ran to him, calling out in panic from above. A look of contempt fell upon the one who had dared to underestimate his magical defenses. Unfazed, the protagonist walked away from the scene, leaving the unconscious body behind. He knew it was only a matter of time before others appeared, predicting the real confrontation to come in a week. The prediction aligned with the change in the chemistry class, where the woman in a white coat, under the stern gaze of Professor Gemini, explained combinations that required precision. She warned that mistakes in the process would result in lethal substances, pure poison. Meanwhile, some students listened attentively. Others rested bored on their books and desks. With one eye half open, he watched the professor with little enthusiasm. Gemini's attention shifted directly to him, maintaining steady eye contact. After concluding the explanation on magical infusion, the professor announced it was time for questions. With a slight smile, he issued a direct challenge to the one who had remained silent. In the back of the classroom, the redhead demanded that he explained why full moon pills were so difficult to prepare. Without hesitation, he stood up from his chair and responded objectively and confidently. He stated that the secret was in the stalks of the purple ulcers, which required meticulous cleaning to avoid turning the concentrate into a deadly toxin. The teacher acknowledged that he found her classes boring, but despite the good answer, nothing had changed in 2 years. She then invited the student to come down and demonstrate the preparation of the pill in practice. His eyes widened in shock. He then closed them briefly, frustrated. He descended the amphitheater steps amid the murmurs of classmates, mocking his failed journey. With heavy steps he walked toward the professor, carrying on his back the weight of expectations. He decided to give it a chance. The boy remembers Professor Gemini's arrogant lectures from 2 years ago, all because innocently he had shattered her self-esteem. He raised his hand to ask a question. She asked what he had said, and confronted him about her teaching methods. The chalk broke in the professor's hand. Turning with a stern face, she scolded him for trying to teach her in her own class, and called him a deserter. Back in the present, they are face to face in tense silence. He thinks that if he were from an influential noble family, their relationship would be different. But being from a poor lineage made him an easy target in the academy. He carefully mixes the chemical ingredients in a bowl with precision. Once done, he pours the purple mixture into a clean glass vial. He gently shakes the solution, keeping his hand cautiously above it. After a few moments, he places the vial on the table without haste. The students around are surprised to see the potion match the exact color in the textbook. With wide eyes and mouth agape, Gemini asks how he achieved such a perfect result. The young man smiles satisfied. He begins to explain calmly that he followed the revised recipe, approved by the magical community 2 years ago. His words make her sweat uncomfortably. In front of the class, he steps away from the workbench, buttoning his suit while she remains in shock. Other teachers begin overwhelming him with difficult tasks, wanting to test him. Some are shocked by the results and stand speechless. Even when taming a monster, He manages to complete the task with precision. During the current semester, he experiments with all types of magic, including fire magic, which he previously only had basic knowledge of. He furrows his brow upon realizing his mana sensitivity is still mediocre, yet the gap between him and his peers is overwhelming. Professor Vince praises his progress in front of the other professors, who watch in disbelief. Two girls comment on how their opinions about him have changed, drastically now looking at him with envy. Bullies in the class don't understand how he got so strong in such a short time, and they argue among themselves. Another student sitting on the steps commented that the protagonist beat up the younger brother of the boy ahead of him, and that made the bullying decrease a lot. Garcia smiles, discreetly confirming his own conclusions. He positions himself in front of the speaker, and the figure of a red predatory animal appears behind him, saying that his family was ashamed. A short-haired boy asks if there's any way to get revenge. Garcia smiles, saying that there really is a chance to defeat him. His smile widens as he plans to beat him in the next day's magical battle. Professor Vince holds a piece of chalk and writes on the blackboard about the importance of magical battles. He turns and explains that wars come when least expected. There's a shortage of mages, even though their colossal power is growing. Wearing red glasses, he compares the situation to a veteran soldier on the battlefield, stating that a fourth circle mage can eliminate 100 people alone, with his hands in his pockets. In a calm voice, he continues the explanation, saying that a mage on the field is a high-level strategic weapon. Looking at the class, he sees that many students are shocked by his words, but at least they all listen attentively. He raises his eyes to the ceiling, reflecting on the students' future. Closing his eyes for a second, he listens to the silence in the room. He points to the words written on the board and asks everyone to remember the career counseling. Before the competition, raising a finger, he begins listing the rules of the magical duel. First rule: total ban on the use of magical items during battle. Raising his second finger, it is forbidden to attack before the official announcement of combat. Then he lifts his third finger. Altering the match order is prohibited. He looks seriously at the students and warns them firmly. He announces he will personally expel anyone who breaks these rules. Garcia throws his hands behind his head and smiles enthusiastically at hearing this. Theo closes his eyes and rubs his hands together in concentration. Vince clasps his hands behind his back while listening to the students shout in readiness. He lowers his head and looks at his notebook with a satisfied expression. He briefly smiles and announces the beginning of the first training match. He adjusts his glasses with one hand and raises the notebook with the other. He informs the students that they may refuse the challenge, even after being called, then starts announcing the two first contenders of the opening round. Garcia Carter is the first to be called, stepping out as the victor, pounding his fist on the desk with hands in his pockets. He descends the stairs upon reading the name of the second participant. Vince's mood suddenly changes. His smile slowly fades as he announces the next fighter. Theo raises his hand, ignoring the other student's provocation. He walks down the stairs with firm steps. Down below, he faces his opponent directly. The adversary watches him, noticing his calm features and expressionless face. The challenger's hands remain in his pockets. As the man around him begins to glow, the opponent simply observes with an indifferent and cold gaze, raising his hand, causing lightning to spark as his hair stood on end. He taunted his opponent, saying he was one of the worst. However, the protagonist simply stared at him and gestured with his hand, calling him forward. He reflected on how foolish it was to underestimate him. Professor Vince then interrupted, jotting something in his notebook. While asking them to save their energy, he stepped between the two, explaining that this was just a training session, not a real fight, and reinforced that the goal was to learn both defense and offense. The boy rolled up his sleeves and clenched his fist, keeping his eyes fixed on his opponent. The other kept his hands in his pockets and laughed, showing he was ready for the confrontation. Vince took a coin, explaining that the fight would only begin when it touched the ground. The coin was tossed. It began spinning in the air. It revealed the image of a man. The professor asked Theodore to get ready. Still spinning in the air, the coin showed the crown. Thus it was decided that the first attack would come from Garcia. When the coin hit the ground, showing the correct side, Vince immediately authorized the start of the duel. The first to attack cast a lightning spell directly at the opponent. A yellow barrier was created, managing to block the attack, though it cracked through the cracks. The defender appeared surrounded by smoke. While staring at his opponent, he concluded that he had tried to win with a quick spell. He clenched his fist, feeling confident that he could win if he used his mind wisely. He hoped the other would continue underestimating him, just to be defeated in style. The aggressor cleared the smoke. Remembering how weak students always ended up getting hurt, the hero called out again, saying he was naive to think he had already won. Annoyed, the other couldn't understand how his attack had been blocked so easily. Theodore rotated his hand and summoned fire spears that appeared behind him in formation. Before using the power, he declared that the opponent would pay for what he had done. With a firm motion, he launched the spears directly at the target. The opponent activated a golden barrier. While mocking the attack, however, his expression changed as he noticed cracks forming. The high concentration of spells in a single point ended up breaking through the defense. His expression changed again upon realizing how insane it all was. The barrier exploded with such magnitude that he had to throw himself back. Due to the impact, his existence was nearly extinguished. Covering his face with his arms, he stared at his rival in complete shock. Between his arms, he tried to understand how the spell had been manipulated, yet even expressionless his opponent was still standing there. Despite that, he smiled with fury, revealing that he would now take him seriously. He gathered energy into his fist, which began to glow intensely in red. While controlling the spell, he thought about defeating him for good. His body was engulfed in flames and red mist. He prepared the new spell. A massive fireball was launched, going directly at his opponent, forcing him to cross his arms. He invoked a barrier called Pyramidal. The fireball collided with the barrier and ricocheted violently. The smoke prevented the students from seeing what had happened. Soon the mist began to fade, and one of the students noticed something. It was Theodore walking calmly and firmly. He stopped and observed his enemy from afar. The opponent widened his eyes in shock, seeing him still standing. Now his turn. He warned Garcia that he was going to counterattack. His hand turned red and steam began to rise from it. Unclenching his fist, the smoke thickened in red. Seeing this, in fear, he fell to the ground and began crawling, begging for a break. Raising his flaming fist, he said to never underestimate his opponent again. He cast the spell with high concentration, hitting his rival directly in the chest. His eyes rolled back and he lost consciousness. Without understanding what hit him, his body was thrown until it crashed against the arena barrier. Vince watched everything. The students were in shock at the sudden turn of events. The winner struck his fist against his own chest. Celebrating victory, the students began shouting his name. Overwhelmed by what they had witnessed, the loser was still on the ground, looking forward and finally realizing he had lost. Filled with rage, he glared at the other, blaming him for everything that happened. Even injured, he got up, staggering and trembling with fury. Under Vince's gaze, the professor noticed that he still hadn't accepted defeat, as he had not recovered his magical power. The protagonist remained with his arms crossed. Bending in pain, the defeated one proposed a true duel. Without saying a word, he pulled a magical item from the pocket of his coat. Disturbed, he demanded a new duel with the boy. In the name of the Carter family's honor, the young man pulled a small red and yellow object from his chest. While watching the scene intently, the professor kept his hands in the pockets of his coat and observed the challenger from afar, showing confusion at the immediate challenge. After such a defeat, through his round red glasses, he found the second challenge amusing. He noticed the rage in the student's eyes and became concerned that the Carter family's reputation might spread further. After this humiliation, the young man looked desperately at the object in his palm, revealing that this was now more than just a simple duel. The professor furrowed his brow, thinking the student would not hesitate to resort to artifacts. To secure victory, he even considered stopping the fight. But upon looking at the other boy, he saw that his eyes also burned with rage. The young man froze with a hostile expression. As he raised his arms with his sleeves rolled up, he clenched one hand into a fist and extended the other, positioning both in front of him. The challenger shouted, invoking the spell of the red fire, claws of madness and the abyss. Eyes burning with wrath, he squeezed his fist tightly, releasing bright rays of light. along with a blazing orange aura around him. He crouched and pressed his hands against his chest, commanding his rival to face. In that instant a massive, beastly silhouette rose behind the caster, and his clothes and hair turned a deep red. The boy, covered in sweat, raised an eyebrow and said the other had completely lost his mind. The opponent, with his clothes and hair in tatters, shouted for transformation as an explosive wave of flames erupted. Wrinkled with rage, he approached the student, questioning whether he would be able to endure the deadly attack. The student observed the challenger with concern, raising an eyebrow and saying that all of this was ridiculous. With white, prideful eyes, the other shouted for his rival to stop pretending, claiming the barrier wouldn't hold. The young man simply mocked his opponent's ability. Then, with an arrogant smile, he asked how the caster could be so confident in victory, reminded him that he was using all that power against a mere inferior student. The other, his face twisted with rage, yells that he'll send the student straight to the next world. The protagonist responds calmly, saying he's wasting time listening to threat. He taps his own chest with his index finger and says, "The attack can come now." The challenger laughs at the words, saying that victory or defeat no longer matters. He gathers concentrated flames in his hand and declares he'll fry the boy, while restoring the honor of the Carter family amid death threats. He clenches his fist and strikes with force, forming an extremely powerful fire attack. Flames light up the entire room around them. This makes it hard to see anything nearby. The mage crosses his arms over his chest, closes his eyes, and thinks that his barrier won't be enough. He recalls that his opponent used fourth circle magic, and reflects that the caster forgot about the unpredictable nature of magical interactions. Suddenly he opens his eyes wide and furrows his thin eyebrows. He kneels down, touches the ground with the palm of his hand, and raises the earth around him. He shouts with force, creating a dome-shaped earth barrier. Through the walls of the barrier, he sees the furious face of the enemy. Advancing fire attack collides with the stone dome, which shatters, sending fragments flying in all directions. Multiple small flaming attacks continue toward the barrier, focusing on one specific point. The space fills with thick, dusty mist, obscuring everyone's vision. The professor, visible through the dust, watches every detail of the fight with heightened attention. A young man and a girl look on in horror at the destroyed barrier. Fueled by anger, they declare that the boy will pay with his life for mocking the rival. The challenger wipes his chin and smiles, saying it was absurdly hot in there. Suddenly his blue eyes widen in shock. He sees a fist emerging from the rubble. The student, with his hand raised above his head and one eyebrow lifted, peers among the debris. He asks if the enemy was sleeping during class, since they studied the nature of the elements in their first year. Eyes full of frustration nearly pop out of their sockets. As his lower jaw drops in pure disbelief, the teacher lets out a smile, followed by a faint sigh showing disappointment in the aggressor. The spectators remain in shock. Little by little they looked toward the approaching professor. With eyes burning with anger, he approaches the one responsible for the attack and orders him to stand. The challenger stares at the professor in fear, trying to explain with a trembling voice. He immediately falls silent when the teacher grabs him by the shirt and lifts him off the ground. Violently, the enraged professor delivers a powerful punch. Throwing him aside, he crashes to the ground and covers his face. In a late attempt to defend himself, he stays down with his cheek pressed against the floor, bleeding slightly, while saying he can explain everything with a crazy smile. The professor grabs the injured student and clutches his clothes with furious strength, demanding to know how he had the nerve to use an artifact. During his class, the student stares at the professor in terror, trying to understand exactly what he means. The teacher's face is covered in bulging veins, as deep wrinkles form between his brows. On the caster's palm is a red diamond-shaped symbol, accompanied by two small rectangles. With his shirt blood-stained, he tries to explain everything while covering his face with one hand. Professor glares in fury, clenches his fist, and asks if he thought through what he did. Even groaning in pain, the student is pulled by the shirt and brought face to face with the teacher. The professor states that he saw everything with his own eyes and won't accept excuses. He accuses the boy of using an artifact in front of everyone, thinking it would go unnoticed. The young man closes his eyes and says he did it for the honor of his family. Growling, The teacher asks if he truly believed that would protect any honor. With contempt, he declares that the student represents nothing, and then throws him away. The boy trembles and covers his face on the ground as the teacher approaches with firm steps, summoning him and mourning that he must go to the office after class. Suddenly he calls the protagonist loudly, leaving the young man confused, ordering him to go to the lab immediately without asking questions. Unfortunately, he just accepts it. The scene shifts to the research building where the boy walks. He knows that now might be the moment. He starts walking through the hallway with his hand over his head, bringing his hand to his chin. He thinks about his professor's reaction regarding the abnormality of his development. Sweating, he realizes that his sudden change could raise dangerous suspicions. He finally gathers courage, but first looks up. The young man looks at the laboratory sign and panics for not having a prepared plan. Staring at the palm of his hand, where gluttony reveals itself, he fears being mistaken for using dark magic. With no other option, he decides he must hide the truth as much as possible. Knocking on the loud door politely, he asks for permission to enter. Hearing him, Vince replies calmly from the other side, granting entry after the confirmation. He opens the door slowly after greeting him. The professor ends up saying, "He just came from the council with some news." He smiles and offers him a seat. He then explains that he was concerned about the student. The boy sits down and hears that the case was resolved, with help from everyone involved. However, now it was time to close the matter by getting straight to the point. Taking the artifact used by the other student, he hands it to the protagonist seriously. He immediately recognizes the raging flames, an extremely powerful artifact. The teacher confirms that his rival used the artifact during the battle. He also explains that the item contains the soul of Horka, the fire wolf. The artifact transforms magic into flames, and now serves as an official apology. The professor offers the artifact to the boy as a reconciliation gift. Surprised, the young man asks if he's really serious. Everything is confirmed. It's that or accept Garcia Cartel's expulsion as punishment. Forcing a smile, he states that he has no regrets left. The professor praises the choice, saying it was a wise decision. At that moment, he watches his student storing the newly given gift, but his expression changes drastically to serious. Closing his eyes, he calls out to his student. Sweating heavily, he listens as his mentor says he has a personal question to ask. Knowing they've been together for over 6 years, he laments the lack of visible progress due to his limitations. His only reaction is to lower his head, hearing in silence the speech laden with disappointment. Vince, deeply frustrated, knows that even after the break, there's been a drastic change in the boy, and so he knows he'd never do anything dirty to grow stronger. Leaving room for doubt, hearing this, he bites his lip, struggling with the urge to confess his burdens. Seeing the hesitation in his student, he asks if he can share everything that's happening. Conflicted within, he wonders whether he should lie or tell the full truth. Fearing the discovery of the stolen books and the existence of gluttony, which would lead to his expulsion. Through his glasses, the teacher simply watches in silence. At last, he looks his professor in the eyes and makes the final decision. Closing his eyes, he calls for his mentor. Gripping his left arm, he asks him to observe carefully. A black stain begins to spread across his palm. From it, a thin, dark smoke starts to rise. Seeing this, he starts sweating nervously and asks, "What is happening?" Fear in his voice. The student responds coldly, telling him to just observe and not worry about anything. The black smoke intensifies even more over his hand, wrapping it in a rising spiral. Suddenly, the laboratory begins to glow, surrounded by an intense pink mist. In the middle of the smoke and mist, the boy says in a cold tone that it's lunchtime. The professor's eyes go wide in fear, completely unsure how to react, watching the boy with a confused gaze, not understanding what he's witnessing. He asks what's going on. While trying to grasp the situation, the young man remains calm, but dark energy begins spreading from gluttony. Lighting up the room, the creature opens its mouth with excitement. The scene shifts to the past, where his reflection is mirrored in the glasses. Sitting down, he asks if that's really the mediocre performing student everyone knows. The boy replies that grades no longer matter, because now skills speak louder at Bergen Academy. Remaining thoughtful while observing the boy, he recognizes that his abilities surpass those of any other student. Getting closer, He explains that his talent is better than any ordinary student's, and with support he could stay much longer. After hearing this tempting offer, he reflects on the matter, especially in a school full of enemies. Back in the present he releases gluttony, which leaps from his hand, and stretches its tongue toward the artifact on the table. With a quick movement the grimoire opens its mouth even wider, and the object goes deeper into its small mouth. All this while the professor narrows his eyes in surprise. The pink smoke spreads through the office, surrounding everything. A system message notifies that the artifact has been successfully consumed. A pendant was made from the distinct technique passed down by the Carter family. The boy's magical energy increases, being temporarily converted into flame magic. In front of him, he watches in silence as the energy of gluttony surrounds a young man, enhancing his power. The little creature, after consuming the book, exhales in relief, without understanding what is happening before his eyes. His only reaction is to drop his jaw in shock. But Sumi asks the student to explain everything, so he can understand it once and for all. From what he heard, he understood that in his left hand he held a grimoire that devours books and magical artifacts. After telling everything, the boy starts to sweat cold. Closing his eyes, he tries to absorb everything he just heard. He then says that grimoire is extremely powerful, explaining that gluttony absorbs magic and grants unique abilities to its bearer. As his supervisor, he didn't approve of feeding it with the Academy's books, making him reflect on his mistake. After a moment of reflection, it becomes clear that it was a life-or-death matter for the boy, but a warning arises: continuing could lead to being consumed by it. Very tense before his tutor, he prepares to ask an important question. He responds by saying it was just as he thought, being greedy with his grimoire. The boy just nodded with an ironic smile. The master says the answer is simple. To a high-level mage, gluttony would be nothing more than a useless trinket. Hearing this, he's surprised and repeats the question under his breath. With a more serious expression, he explains that gluttony is a parasite that requires a host, and that destroying it would have consequences, for the one who destroys it becomes its next victim. The boy listens in silence, trying to absorb every word. Now calmer, he says that a real mage wouldn't need gluttony, but he acknowledges the boy is still connected to it. The tension turns into something more solid. That's when the professor proposes a pact to protect him. A sense of trust begins to form between the two. Despite all the uncertainties, a magical lock appears in the center of his chest, sealing the commitment with pure energy. He screams, making an oath and promising to keep the grimoire secret. The light on his chest intensifies even more. Theodore watches, surprised and frightened. The office is filled with an intense blue light. The professor remains silent, confirming the pact is complete. Blue markings appear on his hands and also on the boy's hands, symbolizing the bond between them. With tears in his eyes, the young man feels the weight of the moment and the importance of the sealed commitment. Overwhelmed with relief and unexpected support, he breaks down crying. Vince stands up after seeing this shocking scene, placing a hand on his shoulder in a gentle gesture of trust. Smiling warmly, he shows that he believes in the student despite everything. The boy begins to calm down, wiping away his tears while sincerely thanking the professor. A week passes and the student is distracted in class, while another student talks about magical circles and their importance. Bored, he thinks that his life hasn't changed as much as he expected. Even so, he still needs to feed the grimoire with books. But now he feels safer. The image of the professor comes to his mind, and he remembers the master's threatening gaze. But at the same time, he feels the consequences no longer haunt him like before. Because of that, he no longer needs to get involved with the black market. As soon as class ends, the young man heads to the professor's office, even while still dealing with the instability of gluttony. In the hallway, he reflects on the future as the hours pass quickly around him. When he reaches the office door, he knocks twice and waits for a response. Getting an answer, he enters and doesn't understand what's going on. The master answers with a smile and invites him in with a mug of tea. In hand, surprised, the boy notices the master's desk is clean and asks if he's really moving. Vince smiles and points to an object in front of him, asking the student to take a look. On the table is the seal of the Kingdom of Melter, along with an official letter. The master reveals it is an invitation to the magic tournament. Right after, he asks if Theodore knows what that means. Still in shock, he realizes the invitation allows him to accompany the professor to the tournament. Smiling, he excitedly asks if he would like to travel to the capital of magic. By his side without hesitation, he immediately responds with a yes. The professor began to carefully analyze the document, because if there were any errors, they would no longer be able to participate. Sitting across from him, he asked if the rules were really that strict, and with a tone of regret, he was told yes to avoid spies or uninvited people. With a more serious look, he called out to Theodore. Taking something out of his pocket, he asked if he knew the reason he was being taken to the magical tournament of the kingdom of Melter. Bringing his hand to his mouth, he reflected on the question. Vince added that sometimes the saying ignorance is bliss made sense, since there were things better left forgotten. Even after learning them holding the corner of a book, he stated that either way, he would explain the matter. Observing what was in front of him, the student asked if that wasn't the regulations of Bergen Academy. The book opened the master read Article 38, highlighting Section 12, which talked about grades and the basic qualifications for graduation. It was written that, if a student placed third or higher in a competition, supervised by the Magical Society, they would have the right to graduate whenever they wish. He commented that Theodore himself must have felt that, having been at the academy for a long time and likely grown bored, since nothing there motivated him anymore. Boy replied, still uncertain, saying he wasn't sure. The professor said he could see it clearly in his expression. When he walked into the room, sitting down, he listened as the master stated that his biggest concern, magical sensitivity, had already been resolved thanks to the power of his luck. With a worn-out look, he knew he had become a controversial existence. Next, he was asked if he remembered the people who saw him as a nuisance, stating they were nothing more than beasts bound by honor and authority. With a cold expression, the master said those people never regretted their actions, and on the contrary, would continue to harbor resentment toward their opponents. He warned that it would be better to stay away from those people than to remain and get involved in more trouble. Holding his nose, he agreed with what was being said. Soon after, the professor revealed that he wanted to take him to a mentor. Sweating, he thought he agreed with the idea, although he still didn't know if he could win any battles in that place. That's when he heard that normally it would be impossible, but with him it would be different. He believed the boy was just as capable as Garcia, and at the very least could face fourth circle mages. Nervous, he held his arm, and wondered if they were talking about the magical battle division. Adjusting his glasses, he confirmed it, and explained that only the assistant of the invited person could participate, and those assistants were also students. While reflecting, the protagonist remembered that he now had a chance to win, since he had gained the memorization ability after gluttony. Devoured an artifact. It was a powerful ability, capable of storing magic and using it instantly. On top of that, he had Alfred's experience and supersensitivity, abilities obtained through synchronization. Most likely, the invitation had been made based on the results of his last battle. With determination, he said it was worth a try. It was then said that all that was left was to fill out the remaining paperwork. Next, a drawer was opened. The book was taken out and handed to the boy, informing him that 50 euros had been paid for. He stated that identifying originals from replicas was easy, as a replica couldn't be made from another replica, he said. He searched for them one by one and barely managed to acquire them, so he hoped the boy would like it. With a calm gaze, he asked if he could analyze the object. The professor replied yes, since he had promised in that moment. He swallowed hard. He activated his analysis skill system, revealed the introduction of elemental magic, indicating that the book described the spiral of the 4 elements. Mid-roll, the author was known as one of the greatest elementalists of the century, and could sustain a king solely with magic. A second window showed that the book was classified as rare, and that once ingested, it would increase the user's elemental magical abilities. He realized it was an original book, personally written by the author, and there was a small chance of forming a contract with an element. Reflecting on his elemental affinity, he understood that this was an unimaginable opportunity. Curious, the professor asked if that was the first book and what its rank was. He replied that it was rare level. Right after, it was said that only 2 books remain. Holding his cup, Professor said he would do his best to get the next one. While sipping his coffee, he was asked when they would depart. He promptly replied that they would leave the capital in just 3 days, and that he should prepare With a determined look he reflected that in 3 days he would depart. Determined, he began running through the school, even passing by some people in the hallway in a hurry. He quickly opened the door. After entering, he closed it with a soft thud. Without delay, the little creature in his hand began to speak, saying it was hungry, opening its mouth. It threatened to eat its owner if it wasn't fed within an hour. Sweating, he replied that he already understood, and that if he got caught because of it, he'd take full responsibility. Putting his bag aside, he commented that although the amount of food consumed had decreased, the way it asked for food remained the same. Holding it in his hand, he realized the little monster had become pickier about its diet, and was waking up more frequently, which was concerning, but for now, he needed to deal with its hunger. He told Gluttony it was time to eat, and without wasting time, pulled the book in front of him. A window showed that the introduction to elemental magic had been consumed, granting some abilities. Even tired, he was grateful to have acquired the elemental ability. However, another window appeared, revealing that the original book had been consumed, and he was now accessing Midral Hersim. Bringing a hand to his mouth, he asked about the connection before him. Several hands appeared, waiting for the system's link. Those hands pulled him in. As he begged them to wait, he was dragged and thrown to the other side with a tear falling. He asked where he was now. Unfortunately, he was surprised to be launched from a considerable height. The scene suddenly changed, showing an old man smoking a cigarette. Soon after, the protagonist appeared, collapsed beside him, glancing to the side. The man commented that it seemed he had received a guest. Right after, a window displayed that the connection had been established. Theodore wakes up lying down with his face wet, holding his head visibly dizzy. He sees 2 giant blocks of ice connected by floating red ribbons. Sitting up, he rubs his head and tries to recall what he had learned about connections. He covers part of his face with one hand. His vacant stare reveals confusion. He lifts his head to look at the towering blocks of ice above him. He furrows his brow, disturbed by the absurd height around him. A blonde, bearded man with a black eye patch smiles upon seeing him wake up. He then comments that something fell from the sky, and it was the little boy. He repeats the words absent-mindedly. Confused by the situation, his eyes widen as he looks directly at the mysterious man. The man stares at him with a yellow eye, and notices his unusual identity. He introduces himself as the spirit Mindrel Hersin. Smiling in a friendly way, the boy asks if he's trapped in the spirit space of Mandala Grind. Hersim explains that this was the territory of the dispossessed, a place of rest. He says that space was meant to heal the souls of fallen warriors. He states, "It's rare for anyone to find this place isolated from the world." The young man responds that he doesn't understand if the place is special, since he was merely summoned. Adjusting his green cloak, Hersim says he was dragged there by force. The boy stares at his own open hand, surprised to have been brought by an unknown force, and summoned for the first time. Curious, the old man asks what his powers are coming from such an unprecedented event, to which the boy replies that if he told him the truth, he wouldn't believe it. Staring intently, he asks if that's all. Hersin chuckles briefly, and comments that he must have his own worries. He reveals he sensed a presence approaching before the boy's arrival. Taking a sip from a small orange saucer, he says he needs to confirm something. The boy stares at him suspicious. A huge creature with red eyes and mouth appears behind Hersim. The spirit orders him to look into its eyes, without hesitation obeying, but with a frightened expression. He stares. Arsene concludes there is no fire in his eyes, and that he doesn't know how to get angry. He states the boy avoids risks and doesn't match the spirit of fire. He also says he is not as free as the wind nor as flexible as water. He declares the boy is uninteresting, which isn't a problem. Surprise, he asks what exactly that means. Hersim grins, baring his teeth, and the creature behind him lets out a booming laugh. The spirit challenges him to guess based on the creature's reaction. Frowning, he closes his eyes and listens to the next words. Hersim says, "The boy knows perseverance better than anyone and represents Earth." He draws 3 lines on the ground with his finger, illustrating the 4 elements. He throws the contents of the dish onto the ground, and declares that the boy is tough, but honest, thoughtful, He stares at the ground as something strange begins to happen. The ice blocks shatter and begin floating around. Flash erupts as the shards of ice form a hole in space. A pale female face appears from the center of the hole, with glowing yellow eyes with long blonde hair, pointed ears, and a glowing blue necklace. The girl spins down and falls head first, caught in her own hair during the fall. She shrinks until she fits in the boy's hand. Still in disbelief, he holds her gently and in shock, asks if she's really the spirit of Earth. Girl opens one bright eye and extends a tiny palm toward him, with two small horns on her forehead. She touches his thumb with her tiny hand. He blushes, finding her incredibly cute, even without understanding her. Sin smiles and introduces the girl as Mitra, the spirit of Earth. She reveals she's one of the ancient forgotten spirits, says she liked the boy, and explains that it was Mithra who responded to the summoning. When he asks if it's too small, Herseem says it doesn't matter. He states that it's necessary to grow with it in order to awaken its true power. He places a black cauldron over the fire and invites him to eat. Before leaving, Herseem insists that a meal before the journey wouldn't hurt. Mithra watches curiously, picks up the plate hesitantly, and comments that maybe it's not such a bad idea. Looking at the liquid in the plate, he ends up seeing black hands reflected on the surface. Startled, he bares his teeth, turns abruptly and screams. Multiple black hands emerge and violently grab him by the shirt, lifting him into the air with no chance to react. Herseem watches calmly, holding a plate and spoon in his hands. He smiles and says he's excited about what's coming next. While the boy is dragged away by the hands, the spirit reflects on the power of the left hand. The system informs that the connection with Midral Herseem has been completed. He appears lying down, holding his head in pain. Mithra is lying on his back, and he complains about the situation. Observing the small girl asleep, he senses her overwhelming power. He reflects that even in a childlike form, she carries the presence of a spirit. King covering his eyes with one hand, he curses out loud but then smiles happy. He knows he now has a real chance to win the tournament. Birds fly over the palace towers while Theodore walks sweating, carrying an enormous load on his back. He stops, gasping. Two more suitcases rest at his feet as he sighs. Exhausted 3 days later, at the academy gates, he drags his backpack, sweating heavily. He thinks he brought too many books because of gluttony. Hidden behind the luggage, Vince observes everything, and comments that maybe he should have hired a crew. He smiles and asks why the boy brought so much stuff. He admits he took more than necessary, and reveals that most of the baggage is food for gluttony. Vince smiles and says he expected something like that, so he prepared accordingly. Curious, the boy raises an eyebrow and asks how exactly he prepared. A man opens a white bag that shines with blue light. He explains that it's an artifact, a special pocket for travel. The young man tenses up, remembering he's heard of it before. Smiling, he tells him not to look at the artifact like that. He freezes in fear as he watches the professor place all the baggage into the bag. He ties the bag with a rope and asks him to take off the backpack. With a horrified expression, he obeys and hands it over. The scene shifts to the city of Bergen. They walk among people in red cloaks. The student looks in disgust at an octopus lying in a cart. He calls the professor and says he has a question about the tournament. There are 9 days left until the event, but a month until they reach Monavilla. Vince says it's not a problem, because they're not the only ones going there. He comments that there are other routes used by merchants. He explains that trade routes are dangerous but much faster. He says that monsters and bandits can be avoided with money. He's traveled that way before and recommends not going alone. This route shortens the travel time to the capital by threefold. They can travel with the merchants for protection. The boy agrees, saying the cost is worth it. Vin smiles, but his expression turns cold as they approach a white building. He says they've arrived at the merchant group they'll be joining. A blonde woman with a bun talks to a man with glasses. Reading a document, she asks why he arrived so late. She greets Vince cheerfully, saying she'd been waiting for him. Shocked, the boy asks if the two are married, and the professor, sweating, tells him not to even bring that up. Grabbing the man tightly, Anna nearly lifts him off the ground. On the floor, she says she missed him so much, while the boy turns away in disgust at the sight. Watching the scene, he realizes his tutor looks just as confused as he had been in his second year. Looking at the boy, she asks who he is, Vince apologizes and makes the introductions. He says Gordon didn't come and that Anna will be taking his place. She confirms that he went fishing, leaving a note saying he'd be back in 2 months. Hearing that the boy is completely frozen in horror, she quickly assures them that her father's part of the job was already done. Before he left, Vince asks where their team's carriage is. She says it's suited for a 5th circle mage, with comfort and even a shower. While she flirts with Vince, a man with glasses approaches furiously. Even so, she keeps smiling and says the carriage is for only 2 people. Suddenly, the man extends a hand with a brown glove toward her angrily. He grabs the girl by the collar and pulls her, saying she needs to review the trip details, whether she likes it or not. She yells, threatening to fire the subordinate. He replies he'll use the severance pay to go fishing. She informs the professor that their carriage is the 3rd, and will be leaving soon. Both of them are embarrassed by the situation. A large wooden door with a metallic frame opens with a loud creak. The student sees the spacious red interior and says it's better than he expected. Vince explains that they even use spatial magic on the horses. He sits down with a sigh and asks if the other is tired. Vince says he just wanted to ask something before they depart. He simply watches him coldly. He asks the boy to show the spirit with whom he made a contract. He freezes, surprised by the curiosity in those eyes, thinking he looks more expressive than ever. Almost more human. Terror glows in the palm of his hand as he smiles, saying he only achieved this thanks to the professor. He then grabs a notebook and a pen ready to take notes. With a loud command, he summons Mithra amid fragments of stone, and with closed eyes she appears with open arms, presented as the ancient spirit of Earth. Vince adjusts his glasses, shocked by what he's seeing. He asks if he can speak to her directly. He replies that he tried but only heard sounds like a whining baby. Hearing that, he thinks aloud that, after all, she is an ancient spirit. She frowns and stares at the student with her intense green eyes. The young man shows fear and confusion, while Vince asks if he knows the difference between simple and ancient spirit. Mithra holds his shoulder as a string of drool drips from her mouth. Holding a small book, he explains that the difference between ancient and regular spirits is self-awareness. Mythos scarf sways in the air, while Theodore, confused, stares at the professor with a furrowed brow, trying to understand, resting his head in his hands. He says some spirits act like robots. The boy stores Mithra in his chest and asks if he'll ever be able to talk with her. The little one is outraged, while the man states that communication doesn't guarantee consciousness. He explains that summoned spirits generally don't have their own will. Fighting back, the boy stares at the little spirit, scared, and she bares her teeth, furious. Vince states that she is different, that she has her own will and can grow. While the little one bites the boy, he sketches in his notebook and explains that ancient spirits evolve alongside their guides. He slams the notebook shut, knocking the creature off the student's face. Boy says that's enough for today. Visibly tired of the chaos, he lies down and recommends that he sleep too, as it's already getting dark. Removing his glasses, he says they'll meet in the morning. A bright yellow moonlight shines over the green forest. Blackbirds fly over the road of the trade caravan. 2 flocks hunt, seizing prey with sharp talons. One of the birds drops a small, round object filled with orange liquid. The item falls quickly toward the carriages below. Warriors with pointed ears notice the glow in the air and go on alert. One of them stretches out a hand with long nails, trying to catch the object. As he closes his fist, a violent explosion of fire erupts. The wooden wagons are blown away and the forest catches fire. Someone screams loudly, sounding the alarm among the fighters. The ground burns, and at the center stands a man with a bleeding face. Confused and furious, he screams without understanding what's happening. He goes silent as he opens his eyes and sees something terrifying. Above, a crowd of armed goblins surrounds him. Led by a larger one, the tallest shouts in a strange language, raises his sword and charges. With his face consumed by hostility, the blade hits him and scarlet blood splashes through the air. Hearing the noise, he wakes up abruptly, startled. Eyes wide open, he sits up and notices that Vince is no longer in the bed beside him. He throws the cloak over his shoulders and exits the carriage. His gaze sharpens, looking outside. He sees the forest engulfed in red flames. He furrows his brow and assumes they are under attack. He guesses the professor went out to fight, and feels enemy energy nearby. Unable to locate the enemy, His tension rises, still unable to pinpoint the enemy. He grows even more tense and summons fragments of earth around him. With a clenched fist, he kneels and orders Mithra to crawl and scout the area. A nearby explosion makes him cry out for the professor. He closes his eyes and tries to locate the enemies. Through magical waves, he opens his eyes in shock. Drenched in sweat after sensing something terrifying, he concludes that they are elite hobgoblins. One of them with red skin and white eyes grins wickedly. He shouts, warning that they've been discovered by an army of those creatures. In front of him, several of the monsters were already there, standing before the carriage. He wonders how they're moving underground. A goblin in yellow clothing shouts and fires a crossbow. Smiling, the arrow flies at extremely high speed in his direction. With Mithra in his arms, he leaps away from the attacks. The arrows hit the carriage as it rolls across the ground, and stops in front of a goblin in gleaming metal armor. He freezes when the creature roars and raises its sharp dagger. He silently orders Mithra to cause a distraction, and confused, the enemy's sharp stakes burst from the ground, piercing through the gauntlet's bodies. Sitting on the ground, he realizes the enemies are too many. Noticing his low energy, he thinks he's at a disadvantage for having to protect her. While smoke fills the area with rage, covering his face, Jake speaks in Goblin, then switches to the human language and runs toward him. With a tense expression, he raises his hand, causing the earth to rise. A wall of sand forms in front of his face. Jake jumps the moment the barrier appears. He lands hard on the ground right in front of the mage. He says he's seen another like him before. With an angry look and curled nose, he calls the boy a brat. Jake, wearing red armor and holding a dagger, stares at the boy with a smile and asks if he's a magician. Shocked, the boy raises his hand and uses earth magic to protect himself. Not understanding what's going on, he raised the dagger to eye level, and concluded that the boy was weaker than a regular mage. Thorns rise around him as he faces the goblin leader. He lowers the blades, releasing dark mana, spinning around him, while the young man hesitates to cast another spell. Without understanding the enemy's ability, raising his hand, he forms a sword of dark energy, and the goblin analyzes his every move. The opponent runs to attack and the boy leans forward, preparing himself and extending his hand. Gluttony appears with its tongue out, smiling. It asks if there's going to be some fun. The blades stab, but his body turns to sand and dissolves into the wind. The goblin stares, confused at the spot he attacked, not understanding how he vanished. He looks up. He sees the mage appearing in the air with gluttony in his left hand. He prepares a lightning spell with his arms extended, aiming at the opponent. Seeing his determined enemy, he finds it interesting. A massive lightning orb forms in front of him, with mana circles glowing in the air. To the monster, this should be the end. The lightning missile hits the ground, causing an explosion that sends debris flying in all directions. Frowning, he decides to end the fight quickly, but is surprised by the enemy. He appears behind him in midair, surrounded by red smoke, ready to kick. Startled, he suspects the opponent used teleportation magic. Kick hits his face, spinning him violently. He rolls across the ground in pain, only stopping after crashing several times. The opponent lands, softly crouches, then stands and crosses his arms with a smile, asking if that was all he had, saying he wanted to have more fun. With blood streaming down his face, he asked hoarsely how Jake could speak and use magic. He answers that they learned from slaves sold by the mountain bandits. He explains that prisoners of war were used as slaves, including demons. The goblins had a slave mage who taught them everything, and only the great progenitor could sense mana. Learning it all from her, smiling, he says the useless slaves were torn apart by the lower goblins. Still bleeding, he asks if the mage is alive. The other summons his blades again and says not to worry about her, because soon he'll be a slave too. Several goblins appear behind the leader, who threatens to rip out his heart to sell it on the black market. Starting to rise, with blood running down his forehead and fury in his eyes, he opens his hand and swears to kill him and as many goblins as he can. The enemy gets irritated by the threat and the others laugh. The young man raises his hand where only one spell remains, now glowing with light magic. He is ready to fight. An intense light bursts around him, illuminating everything, forcing the goblin to cover his eyes. He appears beside the enemy with a glowing fist, aiming at his face with his hair blowing in the wind. He declares that his hand was made to kill them. He appears behind, and tears through his head with a fist full of flash magic. He extends his hand, stares at the goblins, and in a second passes through several, destroying their heads. His fist continues to shine while he holds a victorious stance, and bodies fall behind him. Those watching are terrified and fall into panic, with veins bulging on his face. He glares at the group, then appears before one of them. Gotlin tries to react, but is struck by an explosion of light visible even between the trees. Vince hears the explosion from afar. He turns his head thinking it was fire magic. He asks Anna what happened. She replies that the fire burned everything. But the losses were small and they lost contact with the tail carriage. Not knowing what happened, he then orders her to keep watch over everything, as he will personally investigate the source of the explosion. He walks toward the wagons where the mercenaries are, and tells everyone to fall back. Exhausted, sweating, and breathing heavily, he appears kneeling behind a cloud of dust. He places his hand on his knee, feeling like he can no longer move. He could even die there. A figure appears in the smoke, a goblin with red tattoos on his forehead and around his eyes. Not understanding, he wonders what is going on. The enemy smiles, asks how he dares to kill Jake, and challenges him to fight. From a distance, Vince whispers to himself, ordering him not to dare die. The red hog goblin stares at Theodore and points his blade at him. Exhausted, he raises his head and looks at the enemy. With steam coming from his mouth, the goblin with red eyes says, he's boiling with rage over the death of his ally. The tired look, he asks what that has to do with him. The opponent grins cruelly, saying it's important to defeat him. As they speak, Mythos figure rises from the ground. The goblin orders the boy to stand, but gets distracted and turns his head to the side. His feet sink into the earth as it rises around him, blocking his path. Furious, he calls it cheap magic. Shocked, the mage watches, not understanding who is casting magic, since he hasn't restored his mana. He turns his head and sees Mithra flying toward him. With her arms extended, he realizes she used all her energy to prolong the summon and trap the enemy. A white stream of mana begins to flow from the hand. Resting on the ground, he rises, clenches his fist, and gathers mana around him. He takes a firm stance, determined to kill the last enemy. His fist with the flash spell glows intensely as he charges forward. The goblin tries to raise his sword to block the attack. The punch shatters the blade and hits the enemy's torso. The blow breaks the stone armor, and blood escapes from the monster's mouth. He raises a hand, trying to strike him from above. Confused, the mage realizes his blow wasn't enough. His pupil contracts, and blood vessels burst in his right eye from the pain. The enemy grabs his neck and slams a knee into his torso, making him scream, his whole body trembling. He's held in the creature's grip. The goblin lifts him into the air, preparing to slant him into the ground. Cursing the enemy, the boy laments having so little mana. On the third, disappears, and the monster grabs him by the clothes, falling backward with him. Greeting his teeth, he activates levitation and freezes both in midair. The smoke from the previous fight dissipates, revealing their bodies floating just inches above the ground. Shocked, the enemy floats upside down. Controlled by magic, the young man escapes the goblin's grasp, flies, spins in the air, and lands sliding. He stares at his opponent, thinking about waiting for his mana to recover for a precise blow. An arrow grazes his head, messing up his hair. Startled, he sees in the distance a goblin holding a spear stuck in the ground. With an expression of hatred, the enemy prepares to launch the weapon. The spear is thrown with such force that it kicks up dust and wind along its path. He touches the ground with his hand, watching the spear approach with his pupil contracted. He knows there's no time to restore mana or escape. Gluttony screams with its mouth wide open, asking if this is the end. It says the mage will die faster than the others. He just listens in silence. Angrily, he digs his fingers into the ground. Refusing to die there, he casts an earth spell, raising a massive wall in front of him. The spear pierces almost the entire barrier, deflecting at the end and saving him. Now lying behind the protection, he extends 2 fingers over it, aiming into the smoke clouds. Mana begins to concentrate at his fingertips, and one of his eyes bleeds, making it hard to aim. He fires a magic missile that dissipates all the smoke in its path. The distant goblin tries to shield himself with his arms, but the spell pierces through and strikes his head. The monster's head jerks backward as he slips, trying to stay on his feet. Even wounded, he grins manically. Baring his teeth, the boy keeps his finger extended, but collapses to the ground drained. The Red Hog Goblin watches the fallen mage. Part of his nose begins to fall off. Smiling with satisfaction, he rubs his nose. He reveals his bald head. Under the hood, he sees himself as a leader and raises his hand, staring at the missing middle finger. At that moment, Vince appears behind him and touches his shoulder. Fire begins to spread from the professor's hand. As he asks if the goblin is sure of victory, the enemy abruptly turns his head. Shocked to see him, Vince prepares to cast a spell. As the monster's body begins to catch fire, he steps away as the goblin screams in pain. Ignoring the cries even while burning, the goblin reaches out his hand, asking where he came from. The hand vanishes in flames as Vince calmly walks away. He walks toward the mage, leaving the charred body behind. When he picks him up, the young man wakes, opens one eye and sees the professor before closing it again. He blames himself for being weak, but Vince says the fault lies in the unstable state of the world. With him in his arms, Professor stands and begins to walk. He asks the boy to look at the people still alive because of him. He turns his head and sees the survivors, revealing a faint, satisfied smile. Blue skin trolls with bone clubs snarled as they fought the mercenaries. Mercenaries in dark armor fought against the trolls, and one of them raised his sword to rally the others. Goblins, trolls, and humans clashed in chaos, and a goblin leaped onto a fighter, who blocked the strike with his sword. Inside the carriage, Vince touched his chin and watched the battle through the window. He noticed the mercenaries were more active than usual, and wondered if they were using troll blood as an elixir. Beside him, the boy also looked out the window and asked if they should help. Smiling, he touched his chin again and said that if he interfered, he'd only hear complaints later. Then Anna appeared at the window, lowered her head and called him husband. He sweated nervously as he looked at her, afraid while she raised her hand. Even after he asked her to stop, she repeated the nickname affectionately with a smile, praising his fight against the goblins. While leaning against the window frame, she also praised the boy while leaning in and looking up, and a subordinate approached carrying a box. Pointing to the young man, she commented on the rumors that he had defeated the goblin leader. Excited by the memory, he said it was actually his companion who finished the enemy. The other smiled, surprised at how fast the news spread, and told his colleague that all the credit would end up going to him. Scratching his neck, the boy smiled awkwardly in gratitude. The girl got upset that they weren't paying attention to her, and raised both arms in protest. The older one asked what the important matter was, and she signaled to the subordinate. As the man opened the box, she explained it was a gift to help defend against the goblins. Inside the box on a soft cushion was a blue fruit. Adjusting his glasses, the boy asked about the item. Raising her finger, she said she didn't know exactly, but that the Magic Academy was interested in the fruit. He tried to decline, and she made gestures with her hands behind her back, running her fingers through her hair. She explained the gift was just an excuse. Surprised, he stayed silent. Then she kept playing with her hair, saying it was part of the preparations left by her father. He sighed, understood the intent of the merchant guild, and decided to accept the gift. The girl celebrated with a clenched fist, and joked that it was a wedding gift, but he asked her to stop. The coachman drove the horses, while a huge caravan followed behind in another carriage. He bandaged his hand while the younger one watched the boy ask what kind of crystal that gift was. The other replied that it wasn't a crystal, and gestured as he explained. He said some plants absorb monster blood and create magical crystals in the form of fruit, called monster fruits because they attract and strengthen monsters. There was a chance the goblins would find these fruits, but no one really knew how to use them yet. Resting his elbow on the window, he said someone would one day discover the secret of those fruits. He told the younger one he would add the fruit to his collection. The young man, joyless, looked at his companion with a sad expression. The older one looked into the distance, and realized their destination was near. The other turned his face in the same direction, and was surprised to see something on the horizon. In the distance, a monumental spiral tower rose, the magic tower of the capital Neltermanaville, symbol of the magic kingdom. There were 4 towers, each a different color, symbolizing the elements, with the central tower being the main one. The mage took off a red cloak, a symbol of the bravest, from the red tower, throwing it elegantly over his shoulders. He walked ahead of his partner, The boy realized the other was a mage from the Red Tower, and the more experienced one said that once they passed the gates, they would go straight to the Magic Academy. The caravan stopped near the gate where the guards started. A conversation with the coachman. The mage had already stepped down and observed the long line ahead, while the younger one also exited the car, looking around. The older one commented on how strict the controls were in Manhaville, and said they wouldn't have to wait. The companion, worn out, reminded him they had an invitation. The young woman, along with her subordinates, noticed that the two were leaving. She shouted, asking to go with them, but was reminded that the invitation was limited. The younger one asked ironically why the other was in such a good mood. As they approached the gate, a guard in a white tunic with a spear greeted the mage. He handed over the invitation through the inspection window. The inspector used a monocle to check the name, and asked for confirmation. He confirmed the information and proceeded to the first checkpoint. The younger one looked back and saw the guards saluting the older mage. A few minutes later they reached the second checkpoint with 2 guards. The younger one asked if they were really going to get in, and the other showed a badge. The guards lifted the curtains and allowed them to pass. The apprentice looked around, impressed by the privileges of magical guests. They approached a shop with a worker in a white uniform. The man held a registration form, and asked if the young man was really a 4th circle mage. He apologized for the question, but said he needed the information for the form. The companion raised his hand with 3 fingers, saying the other was a 3rd circle mage. The staff member was surprised and awkward, as participants were supposed to be at least 4th circle. He explained that even with stabilization, injuries or deaths still occurred in the tournament. A mage from the Blue Tower interrupted, saying that if the boy was a student from the Red Tower, he would survive. The middle-aged man with a braided beard and blue eyes smiled strangely at the 2 of them. A man froze in an exaggerated pose. The young man asked if his companion knew him, who replied he had never seen him before, and suggested the man had bad manners. At that moment the man apologized. Bowing, he introduced himself as a representative of the Blue Tower. Closing his eye, he finished the introduction by calling himself Lauren. The city began to darken with the sunset illuminating the rooftops. Curious, he asked if it was the boy's first time participating in the tournament. Mentioned that the rules had changed and, smiling, offered a form to those present. The boy introduced himself and showed the medal he received, which was confirmed as a tournament pass. His gaze focused on the swinging medal. He was then informed that his registration number was 132. The representative explained that participants would fight, and the winner would take the token from the defeated. Snapping his fingers, he declared that whoever had the most tokens at the end would win the tournament. Vince observed that the rules had changed quite a bit, and the other explained that the large number of participants required adjustments to the schedule. An image of a calendar appeared, and he explained that the old league system couldn't handle it. The older man concluded that the bracket was eliminated. The representative commented that the old system was called barbaric, while Lauren wondered if the rule of the winner taking all was really that bad. Curious, he asked what would happen if someone avoided battles and only took tokens from the weak. Laughing, the man praised the cleverness of the question, and said he expected no less from a member of the Red Tower. He immediately called out to a girl who was behind him, Mia, his favorite student, daughter of Viscount Glucose. Embarrassed, she crossed her arms and greeted everyone. She said the tournament was slow, because the participants were trying to save their own skins, that's why they decided to create new rules this year. Seeing the situation, he commented that everything seemed very vague. The other laughed and explained that anyone with at least 1 token could not refuse battles. He said that's why the boy was there, and that he didn't think the rule was bad. Quoting a saying from the Red Tower, "Those who act without thinking make mistakes." He touched the young man's shoulder and said that if it was hard, he would have time to prepare, since the time and date of the battle would be set by the challenge. The older man tried to figure out what the boy would do. Boy asked if the work day was over. He was told it wasn't, as there was a reservation at a restaurant in the Imperial Court. The other said he'd like to visit that place at least once, so they should finish quickly. Smiling, he declared the battle would happen right now. Surprised, Lauren accepted and suggested they begin. The sun rose over the Pentarium, the multi-stage arena where the fights take place. The battlefield was divided into several zones, with the main hall reserved for the final day. A girl holding artifacts asked the participants to grab protective magic crystals. Examining the crystals, she explained that they blocked up to 3 attacks from the 4th circle with each attack. 1 crystal would be destroyed or 2 if the hit was strong, and whoever lost all of them would lose the fight. He wondered if it was an expensive item, but the girl said they were disposable and cheap. He was annoyed by the explanation. As he held the crystal, Mia asked if he came from a noble family. Upon seeing his reaction to the price of the artifacts, and judging by his expression, said he must be the son of a baron. He complains that she should throw the gum away, not stick it behind her ear, and she replies that it's a glucose family tradition he wouldn't understand. Irritated, she declares that she's going to fight now and steps into the arena. In the stands, the mentors observe the match. The boy clenches his fist, preparing for the confrontation, while the girl announces her name from the left corner. Then she announces her opponent in the right corner. The young woman throws the golden amulet into the air. Thus the battle begins. She creates several magical projectiles and runs toward the fight. With a smile, she says she won't drag out the match, and asks the other not to pull the cat's tail. With her hands forward, she uses an ice punch and yells that she wants to send him home. She orders him not to run. The boy blocks the attack and prepares a counter-attack. His hand is wrapped in a powerful aura as he activates a shockwave. A huge magical barrier appears in front of him, protecting him. He uses a technique called ignition, lifting his tie. The opponent is surprised by the technology. Flying toward her, he raises his palm and activates a lubricating spell. The ground beneath her feet turns to sand and the girl falls. Unable to stay upright, he then dashes forward at high speed and with a single wind strike. The amulet on the opponent's neck begins to crack from the impact. Lauren watches everything with genuine surprise on her face. He approaches the fallen rival and asks what happened. With a disgusted expression, he asks if she wanted him to use less power. Embarrassed, Mia admits he's right and agrees with what he said. The girl shouts as she announces that Theodore Miller has earned the first point. The young man freezes in indignation. The opponent says he has no manners. He raises his finger asking if she wants to keep fighting. In doubt, she puts her hand to her face. Surprised to have been hit by lightning, she tries to activate a technique, but the boy calls Mithra, trapping her with his technology. He begins a chain of attacks with colossal power, launching several magical projectiles. The opponent's barrier starts to crack. She's surprised to see her amulet flying off. He's also surprised by her self-confidence in continuing to use magic. Outside, Vince watches the fight, reflecting that the girl doesn't come from a wealthy family, but has talent. He thinks she only lacks discipline as she grew up being praised. He believes her experience is limited to intimidating guards, lacking the real-life experience of the student, who has already faced life or death battles. She picks up the amulet and comments that 2 of its crystals have already been destroyed. With tears in her eyes, she complains she can't get close to the opponent, saying her father never explained what to do in situations like this, and that she feels lost, worried. The boy apologizes and asks if she hit her head. He notices the girl is overconfident, suspects she wants sympathy, doubts he'll fall for it, and turns his back. She claims everything is wrong while the onlooker watches confused. Sincerely, she says it's the first time she's felt this way. She calls him a rude country bumpkin, creating a wave of ice around her. She orders him to die. He comments that she's moving too slowly, even with the attack where she believes speed doesn't matter. If he's hit, it'll be the end for him. The boy raises a layered shield blocking the attack. The opponent breaks through the barriers. She falls face down on the ground, unable to stand. He says his shield had 4 layers and that they were all broken. With tears, the girl calls him a pathetic worm and makes a shocked comment about her face. The referee announces that the winner is Theodore Miller. Surprised, he realizes he didn't want to make his opponent cry. The representative of the Blue Tower hugs the girl and says she might have better luck next time. The tournament organizer approaches and congratulates him for the victory, but he says he doesn't feel like a winner. Even holding the tokens, she replies that he can think about that later, and hands him the tokens from 4 members. She asks that if any item is expensive, he return it using his own resources. The boy smiles as he looks at the reward in his hands. Reading his book, he asks if the work is done. He smiles and asks if the student found everything too easy. The young man replies that it was trivial. He even comments that this is the difference experience makes, reminding him that the boy carries Alfred's memories. That makes him a battle mage. with knowledge superior to local students. He states that ordinary students are like greenhouse flowers. An unknown man approaches, saying he agrees with everything that was just said. The professor is shocked to recognize the man, smiles while holding his glasses, and wonders why someone so busy is there. The student wonders if that man is really a mage and not a swordsman. Laughing, the newcomer says, "Everything feels grim after so many years without seeing each other." While the master asks him not to hit hard because it hurts, the other laughs and tells him not to be dramatic, then asks to see the student he brought. The professor agrees to the request, introduces the boy as a student from Bergen Academy, and the boy says his name. Happy to meet him, laughing. The man calls him cute and says he looks innocent. He approaches and begins to examine him closely. Smiling, he comments that despite the naive appearance, the boy has been through a lot. He asks if the master found him on the battlefield. He says he would never call the boy a milk-sucker. The student asks who he is, and the mentor reveals that although he may seem rude, he is the Archmage of the Blue Tower. His name is Sir Blundell. Surprised, the boy says he understands, and indignant asks the Archmage if he is the Lord of the Blue Tower. The narrator explains the 4 elemental towers that protect the kingdom of Melter, and introduces the mage hierarchy: beginner, intermediate, talented, veteran, and sage. A young beginner holds a magical staff. A girl smiles wearing a red hat. An observer analyzes the space deep in thought. A man with a masked face represents the veterans. The girl freezes when she turns around, learning that the sages are the true supreme rulers of the towers. The boy is shocked to realize he is in front of the supreme mage of the Blue Tower. Bowing, he introduces himself as a third-year student from Bergen Academy. The other says there's no need for formality, and that men shouldn't walk with their heads down. With a hand on his face, the mentor wonders if something happened. The master of the Blue Tower, Sirius, says they need to stop the fun and that everything is fine. He comments that he was surprised to see the other return. After so long, he notices the young man is with the veteran and says, "It's natural to be curious." The older man, alarmed, realizes how quickly rumors spread. The sage watches the boy with interest. He says he'd like to take him as an apprentice, and would choose him if he didn't already have a student. But the boy replies that he couldn't accept him as a master, even if he wanted to. Surprised, the mentor asks him to repeat that, implying that he also has a student. The Archmage confirms and says, "The winner of the tournament is already decided." The mage in red finds the statement odd, but is interrupted by a girl bringing news. She announces that Sylvie defeated Marcus Giovanni. In just 24 seconds of fighting, she destroyed all 3 crystals. Shocked, the boy reflects on how hard it is to win. Even giving your all, he convinces himself that the difference in power between them is massive. The girl appears with a cane full of amulets. Surrounded by wind, the sage's cape flutters. Her face emerges shadow beneath the hood. She freezes with a worried expression. The boy notices her silver hair. He turns and smiles at the master, who is happy to see her again. She tries to slip away but is called back. He says he wants to introduce her to someone. Surprised, she approaches. He reveals she is his student. Raised in secret, the boy watches her with concern and suspicion. He senses through inherited extrasensory perception that she is stronger than the Hobgoblin chief. The Archmage comments that the boys seem curious. He asks if they want to test her, saying it's a good opportunity. Looking at the young man, she waits for his answer. His face shows hesitation. He bows and refuses, saying he would only show his weak side. The master simply sighs as he smiles, but says they'll leave it for later, and asks the student to come with him. They both end up leaving. The boy quickly turns away. He distances himself from his teacher. The teacher says there are ways to win while avoiding the girl, and the other agrees with his head lowered. He says he admires mages like her. He quickly puts on his cape. Then he states this is his chance. Determined, he promises to challenge her. With his eyes covered by his hair, the mage gets lost in thought. Adjusting his glasses, he comments that, in his right mind, he wouldn't accept this. Smiling, he says his blood is boiling again and taunts his rival, calling him an old raccoon, claiming he wants to see if the shame will freeze into the bone. The young man responds excitedly that he wants to see that too. Leading the way, he He says the first stop will be the artifact shops and bookstores, and mentions that if the student likes anything, just let him know, with his face lit up by genuine joy. Theodore runs up to the master to go out with him. A shopkeeper comments that tourists come to the place, but leave when they hear the prices. Looking out the window, she laments not being able to sell even the best artifacts. She smells a sweet scent of money in the air, and wonders where it's coming from. Her gaze meets the mage as he opens the shop door, and she is taken by surprise. She realizes he belongs to the Red Tower and holds a very high rank. He places his hand on the counter and silently observes the startled shopkeeper. He asks her to show the best product in the store, and says that price doesn't matter. The girl brings out a large chest from the depths of the shop. She shows the contents to both of them and smiles, saying it was the best she had. The maid strokes his chin and reminds her that he said the price didn't matter. Surprised, the vendor confirms that it really was the best item in the store. He says he doesn't believe her, and asks her to bring the higher class items. She comments that since he's a mage of the Red Tower, he has the right to buy them. The young woman brings a mysterious chest and opens. In front of them, a magical glove-shaped artifact appears before the visitors. The older man turns to his companion and asks him to evaluate. The young man places his hand on the magical artifact to examine it. The system reports that it is a wind-resistant armor, made of mithril alloy by a dwarf. It advises that the glove should ideally receive a magic engraving to enhance usability. The description states that the item releases wind magic that deflects projectiles. The system reports that the former owner used it to block volleys of arrows. The item's class is declared as precious, and it increases mastery in wind defensive magic. It is also said that when worn, the glove activates the sponsorship of Yai. The appraiser thinks it's a valuable A/B level item, comparable to the roaring bonfire. Touching the glove, the attendant says it costs 180 gold, but with the invitation she'll apply a discount and charge 144. The mage places a gold bar on the counter. Surprising the girl, he says he'll pay the full price, and asks if there are any other requirements. Holding her face, she says there's nothing else to do. The buyer smiles and says he'll take the item. As a mage of the Red Tower, he naturally wears the magical artifact on his back. A great cloud of dust fills the store as he moves. Placing the bag over his shoulder, he tells the other that they're heading to the next door. The attendant thanks him, still surprised by the purchase. Leaning against a wooden divider, the young man thinks about the money spent, and concludes that his master isn't a Red Tower mage, but a wallet killer seated on a chair. The older man tells him to absorb the rare items first, saying it'll whet his appetite to consume the magic grimoire. The young man holds one of the magical artifacts and agrees. Extending his hand to Gluttony, he says, "It's time to eat." The entity replies that it's been waiting for this for a long time, and with its tongue Gluttony swallows one of the magical artifacts. Several items appear on the entity's tongue, as the system confirms the absorption. Shocked by the process, the boy expresses surprise. The mentor turns and says that absorbing power alone is not enough to reach the fourth circle. Knowledge is also required. Smiling, he says, "It's now time for the student's favorite pastime." Confused, the young man shows doubt on his face. The professor reveals a book and explains that he's talking about reading. He focuses and begins to study its contents. A magical point emerges in his chest as he reads, indicating he's activating the fourth circle. A magical seal appears on his heart and begins to heat up. His face shows genuine surprise at what's happening. The master, adjusting his glasses, asks if he completed the fourth circle. Extending his hand, he congratulates him on becoming a full-fledged mage, and says he can now walk his path with confidence. The young man smiles and replies that he'll try to keep his magic balance. The other concludes that the acquisition is complete, clenches his fist, and invites the apprentice to proceed to the truly precious items. He pours many rare magical artifacts onto the table. The boy watches in disbelief at the quality of the items, thinking they're rare treasures, not cheap goods. The professor tells him not to hesitate and to use everything he can. With a serious expression, he says that once the decision is made, he can no longer be stopped. He asks if he wants to defeat Sylvia. The young man closes his eyes, thinks for a moment and remains silent. Encouraged, he says he understands and extends the magical grimoire. He asks Gluttony to absorb everything and get ready. The master places a hand on his head and says that today they'll have a private lesson. With his hands in his pockets, he explains that Sylvie uses watertight magic. He says the strength of this magic lies in its versatility. Sunlight filters through the treetops as he explains about clouds, rivers, permafrost, and morning mist, highlighting the freedom of water in its solid, liquid, or gaseous forms. He states that water magic has no clear weaknesses, but it also isn't the best at anything. Touching his chin, the apprentice says he considers it an ambiguous form of magic. The master smiles and says, that's just a guess, advising him to avoid direct combat with his rival. The archmage appears with his cane strapped to his back, and the professor asks if the student remembers the staff carried by the head of the Blue Tower. The boy says he remembers, and comments that it looked like a very sturdy cane. It is revealed that it's not a cane, but a club. And the mentor says the old man learned to fight with it as a hobby. In real battles, he explains that many heads were smashed on the battlefield with that weapon. The boy laughs and says he remembers. The girl also has something similar. The image of the sage returns to the boy's mind, leaving his face somewhere between fear and excitement. Professor approaches and says he just needs to avoid getting close to his rival. He forms large drops of water in his hand, demonstrating magic in action. He creates a powerful stream and says training will begin now. Vince appears under a bright blue light with a hostile expression. From a distance, the young man trembles at the sight of him and raises his palm. The older mage raises his arm and casts magic, but the boy dodges the attacks, turns and runs quickly, smiling tensely as he narrowly escapes. He raises his hand and a bright flash shoots from his palm. He falls to the ground and creates a small shield around himself, blocking the magic with his hands in his pockets. He simply watches from afar. He pulls one hand from his pocket and a diamond glows above, suggesting the boy increase the charge and praising his reaction. He wipes the sweat from his chin with his hand and silently stares at the professor with a sad expression. The final day of the student tournament arrives. Sitting with his hands on his knees, he breathes heavily, slowly. He stands up from the ground as his mentor appears before him, saying he wouldn't let the student fight if he wasn't ready, even if it meant being hated. The boy asked hesitantly if that meant he passed the test. Smiling, the elder rubs his chin and confirms that he passed perfectly. In a waiting room in the arena, there's a long table with young participants eating. The scoreboard shows Sylvia in first place with 95 points. Pogani Wolgast appears in second with 21 points. Robert Diane is in third with 18 points. Competitor wearing a black and blue cloak is shocked by the 95 points. A girl with pink hair and dress comments that Sylvie doesn't let anyone collect tokens. She says that's expected from a disciple of the Lord of the Blue Tower. The leader appears sitting at the head of the table, eating bread with his elbow on the table. Her master comments that, in the beginning, opponents still tried to face her, but now, according to him, they've given up. He asks if today's youth are cowards, and the girl bluntly agrees. While chewing, the master furrows his brow, thoughtful upon seeing a boy in black approaching. The challenger bows and greets the Lord of the Blue Tower, who recognizes him as a student of an old acquaintance. Smiling timidly, the boy says it's an honor to be remembered. The opponent keeps eating bread and doesn't acknowledge him. The boy reacts with hostility to her cold behavior. He pinches his own cheeks, realizing the tension from before has vanished, and reflects that this means he has grown stronger. The master smiles and congratulates him for his rapid advancement to the fourth circle, and he thanks them shyly, pointing his hand toward the student. The sage suggests the boy is interested in her. She turns to face him dressed in black, fists clenched without showing emotion. He formally challenges her to a match in the tournament. She stares at him in confusion, as if doubting he could face her. Smiling, the challenger explains he needs her 95 tokens. As he only has 5, he recalls that the tournament rules do not allow the first place to refuse challenges. She brings the bread to her lips and calmly says she will not refuse. The master watches the conversation with a furrowed brow. While the girl places her palms on the table and stands up, she looks at her opponent and coldly says she'll take 5 more tokens to reach 100. The room erupts in excited shouts over the challenge. To the tournament leader, A young man with golden eyes and gray hair last calling him arrogant, while another skinny boy furrows his brows and notes that the tournament ends in 2 hours. A loud shout echoes through the arena announcing its opening. Students in robes and hats fill the stands of the wide, illuminated space, talking about the Blue Tower student and expecting a grand spectacle. A young man in green clothing and a brown mustache raises his eyebrow in surprise at the challenger in the final, while a blonde man laughs and says the loser has already been decided. The crowd rises as the girl in a light blue cloak enters the arena, holding a long wooden staff. With a serious expression, the spectators comment that she is the favorite of the Lord of the Blue Tower. The rival clenches his fists, bothered by the number of onlookers. He worries about being watched by so many people. He puts his hands in his pockets and thinks that deep down, this is what he wanted. He grips his yellow tie with his fingers and concludes that this is the right place to prove himself. He enters the arena confidently, fists clenched. The professor dressed in red and white approaches Blundell, who wears a blue vest with arms crossed. The man accepts the polite invitation. The mage steps closer and both lean on the stone railing smiling. The old man recites the Red Tower's motto: if you can win, win. If not, find a way. Surprised, he remembers it. The sage laughs and comments that the leader of the Red Tower repeats it all the time. With his head resting on his hand, he asks if his friend thinks the challenger stands a chance against the disciple. The mage furrows his brows and says, it's not worth making speeches about it. Looking at his colleague through red glasses, he states it's better to watch and see who wins. The center of the arena glows with intense light. A girl with brown hair and a large, light hat excitedly announces the final match. The audience watches the challenger, in a blue and yellow cloak with white hair, flowing in the wind as the opponent's name is loudly announced. He takes off his black jacket and rests it on his shoulder. The announcer raises her hand and fires a bright flash into the sky. The young woman stares at him with a determined gaze. Holding her staff, the boy covers his face with his palm. Watching his opponent, the announcer loudly declares the start of the battle, giving the official order for the fight to begin. The boy covers his mouth with his hand, reflecting that he analyzed all of his opponent's fights and concluded, her casting speed is incredibly high. Frowning, he summons flames in the palms of his hands, where that missing the right moment could mean the end. He launches dual fire projectiles, and the space around fills with glowing red mist. She remains still, staring intensely, her cloak and hair fluttering. Frowning and smiling, he commands the storm's strength to strike. A stream of scalding fire rushes toward the opponent. Even with the flames approaching, she stays calm and positions the wooden staff in front of her. Wrapped in his own fire, the boy believes his magic combines speed and power, and that the girl's water protection won't withstand. She brings the staff close to her face with a faint smile. Mage crosses his arms in front of him, as a fire explosion echoes through the arena, covering everything in smoke. Amid the thick mist, he appears standing with legs bent and apart, crouched over the dense smoke, observing. The crowd reacts with anger and shock at what they see. Through the dense smoke, the black silhouette of the caster emerges. He touches his chin with his fist, thinking his opponent is hiding in the smoke. Covering his nose and mouth, he frowns and activates the hawk's eye. His pupils become sharper, but she still doesn't appear clearly. He clenches his fists, believing he hit her. But then, he considers the temperature and recalls that the colder it is, the stronger the ice. He concludes the girl is creating a low-temperature barrier to resist. Suddenly she appears through the smoke with her staff raised. She slams the staff onto the ground, summoning a glowing blue mist around them. The wind lifts her clothes and hair. His face shows surprise as he recognizes fourth circle. Water magic. She summons a massive serpent made of water above him. She swings the staff forcefully, slicing the air. Creature lunges forward with extreme speed. He opens his mouth in shock as several magical attacks rush toward him from all directions. He jumps and crosses his arms to shield himself. The water strikes the ground, raising columns of dust and earth. The serpent continues chasing him as he tries to escape. He already doubts that this magic is just fourth circle level. Jumping away, he screams and conjures a magic shield. While the arena fills with glowing blue attacks, he moves between the water jets, leaving a yellow trail, and realizes that just dodging isn't enough. Due to the sheer speed of the attacks, Frowning, he changes tactics and decides to attack directly. He turns and charges forward to close the distance, while the water serpent advances with its mouth open. Menacing at the moment he tries to get closer, a powerful jet of water separates them. He is thrown backward violently. He lands far from his opponent and grumbles in frustration. The master watches the fight attentively. The archmage smiles and comments that fire and thunder don't compare to the water serpent, asking what the other is planning. With sharp eyes he thinks that the student will soon reveal his answer. The young man places his palm on the ground and closes his other hand into a fist. He furrows his brows, shuts his eyes, and brings his fist to his lips. The serpent collides with a yellow flash, accompanied by a thunderclap. While retreating he thinks of a second option, a free shot, reflecting that now in the fourth circle, he can use 3 or 4 magic seals. As the attacks close in he decides to immobilize the serpent. The creature attacks and he propels himself with his feet, releasing magic from his palms. He calls out Mithra loudly, and the earth spirit immediately appears by his side, receiving the order to attack without mercy. The serpent continues to pursue the exposed targets. His rival's attacks tear up the arena floor, causing explosions. He exhales sharply and covers his face due to the thick smoke. A flash appears within the mist. He crosses his hands and points toward the distant enemy. He smiles in relief upon seeing her clearly, but the serpent blocks her view, preventing her from seeing her opponent. He raises his eyebrows, bares his teeth, and releases a bright yellow spell. She remains still as the shot passes through the smoke. A transparent shield appears in front of her. She is hit as the barrier breaks, being thrown upward by the attack. She opens her mouth and grips her staff tightly, while the triangular emblem on her cloak shatters, scattering fragments in the arena. 2 mists face each other. Kneeling and exhausted, he keeps his hands lowered. A girl with a glowing hat tries to speak, but falls silent. Shocked, Theodore stares at his opponent with a superior gaze, while the narrator loudly announces that the challenger has earned the first point. He smiles, believing he can easily win the other 2, but as he thinks that, he sees the girl emerging from the mist with her staff in hand. Anger now appears on her once emotionless face. She stares at him with hatred and he freezes in fear, completely caught off guard. The girl appears through the dust, her expression serious and eyes focused. Soon after, the boy appears, sweating and breathing heavily. Noticing the difference from before, he widens his eyes, clearly shocked by what he's seeing from above. She leaps into the air and fires dozens of ice arrows at him. The young woman drops the blade and stares coldly at him, her eyes glowing icy blue. The arrows close in quickly and panic prevents him from reacting. Instinctively, he summons the flaming palm, forming a hand of fire before his body. As her white hair flows in the wind, he trembles while keeping his arm extended. The clash between fire and ice causes a violent explosion, followed by flames that continue to burn. Clenching his teeth, he increases the intensity of the flames even further. He then activates the protection of the western wind, raising a barrier to shield himself. His armor shatters into shining fragments. He manages to stabilize and looks back, as black smoke and red sparks rise from his back, while a blue mist begins to fill the arena. With his hair standing on end and a grim expression, he recognizes in horror the frozen earth technique. At the center of the mist, his opponent grips her staff firmly and speeds across the ice. Her light blue eyes lock intensely onto him. Suddenly she strikes the ground hard, unleashing a powerful shockwave. Dragging himself with difficulty, he digs his hands and feet into the ground until he's able to stop and catch his breath. She watches him silently as sand rises around them, and the mist thickens. Remembering the master's warning about close combat, he feels intimidated by her threatening stance. Behind her, the image of a 3-faced deity materializes, amplifying the danger. The previous impact had already made it clear. Her weapons are deadlier than magic. Focused and resolute, she advances with blows so strong they destroy the ground. While he, staggering, barely manages to dodge. He leans his body backward, narrowly escaping and realizing he must flee the situation at all costs. Another strike hits and the resulting explosion hurls him far away. Under the watchful eyes of others, dust rises and he tries to hold on, fists clenched and face tense. but he ends up being hit directly and thrown out of the arena. He tries to grip the ground with hands and feet, but a blue magical wave pushes him even farther. Sitting and surrounded by freezing mist, he rises with difficulty, supporting himself on his knees and back. He notices with frustration that one of the crystals was destroyed, though he acknowledges he's gained some distance from his opponent. He brings a hand to his chin, analyzing the situation, but when he lifts his eyes, he realizes in horror that she is already standing before him, still holding the staff in her hand. She just gives a faint smile. However, she lifts her face again, with an even broader smile and a slight blush on her cheeks. Surprised by the unexpected expression, he simply watches in the stands. The head of the Blue Tower watches everything. Beside a professor from the academy, the elder comments that excessive talent can lead to loneliness, leaving the other intrigued. He then explains that the girl never had a true friend, as her worldview differs from everyone else's. While stroking his beard, he notices her genuine smile. Concluding that she no longer looks frightening, but rather joyful, she shouts, explaining with joy how fun it is to play together. She is watched by her master, who crosses his arms and allows her to express herself freely. Meanwhile, orange jets surround the boy, still kneeling on the ground. She leans forward and opens her arms, channeling the cold around her with concentration. Fire and ice collide, filling the battlefield with chaotic energy. Using ice to accelerate, she moves at high speed, dodging the attacks as she approaches. The boy raises his energy and fires a golden beam. With his free shooting technique, the opponent swiftly dodges and launches herself into the air, raising her staff with a crazed look in her eyes. She recognizes the technique he used earlier, and without hesitation attacks with fury. Boy jumps to the side, appearing just behind her, while creating illusions with the image of his clone. Clenching his teeth, he says it was obvious that place was a trap. A spear of earth appears unexpectedly and pushes her away, causing her to spin around it and grip the staff tightly. He thinks that surprises like that only work once, and observes her closely, trying to assess if she was injured. At that moment, a powerful shockwave hits him entirely, forcing him to bend over, rubbing his back. He stares in shock at what lies ahead, and finally realizes that she had been copying his techniques all along. With an innocent smile and half-closed eyes, she reveals her satisfaction. He, however, stares at her, consumed by rage, finally acknowledging the real danger she poses. In the dark, the girl closes off her heart and releases ice spikes, remembering that jealousy, hatred, and distance pushed others away from her. In response to the attack, the boy activates a wave of earth, lifting sand around them. The sand is launched to contain the ice spikes. She believes the wall in her heart is a barrier, preventing her from reaching the fifth circle, leaving only the marks of failed attempts. Raising her staff, she notices the opponent shows neither hatred nor fear. Surprised by his magic, she gently observes him with her blue eyes, and feels a strange desire to get closer. Leaning against the red wall, she closes her eyes and thinks that she wants to defeat that opponent. The professor observes everything from a high balcony, while the leader of the Blue Tower rests his hand on the edge. Surprised by the scene, his eyes widen, as he realizes the fourth circle's barrier has been broken. With a flushed face, the young woman shouts that she wants to win. Gripping her staff tightly, the boy looks at her in horror, afraid of what she will do. With a mischievous smile, he says that he also wants to win. He recalls the countless failures that haunted him since entering the academy, but everything changed when he met gluttony. Determined, he declares that this battle will be the end, because he no longer wants to live in the shadows of others. She begins to levitate with the staff in her hands. Under the pressure of magical energy, he realizes she is using second circle levitation, effective against ground-based attacks. The girl spins her staff with focus, creating ice blocks in front of her for protection. He looks up with a scowl, concludes it's an ice shield, and tries to remember if it's the same one that blocked his first fire projectiles. As she continues spinning the staff, more ice forms, the arena fills with blocks. He remains still, thinking about how to proceed. He realizes he can't break the shield with a simple attack, and that it's difficult to fight without knowing her exact location. When he realizes he's being challenged to a direct clash, he hopes she also has a trump card. Placing his hand to his face, he decides to accept the challenge, and hopes both of them reveal their trump cards at the same time. He crosses his arms in front of him and calls for Mithra, his assistant, who flies above his head while chunks of earth begin to float. He prays to the earth spirit, asking it to answer his call and send stones. He activates fourth circle fortress magic, concentrating all the stones into 2 large piles in the sky. Then he activates double catapult. With a serious look, he asks for forgiveness for making her suffer. While Mithra watches him with disapproval, he opens his hands, and a stream of fire begins to form between his thumbs and index fingers. He raises his palms to the sky, activating twin fire projectiles. Now 2 massive stones and 2 fire projectiles rise before him. Showing his teeth, he thinks that the winner will be decided by magic. The ice shield begins to melt slowly under the pressure of the fire projectiles. The shield melts completely and she appears flying in the sky. She closes her eyes and turns, asking the Lord of Ice for power. A strong blue stream begins to flow from her toward the enemy. She stares firmly at her opponent and summons a light snowfall. Then, she strikes the air with her staff and releases a powerful icy blast. Ice and fire opposing elements once again close in, filling the surroundings with the tension of the imminent collision. Focused, the boy releases a stream of fire from his hands and tells Mithra that the time for battle has come. He activates the fusion of his 2 floating magical weapons. The fire shells merge with the stones, which begin to glow intensely. He clenches his hands and the fire fuses with the stones, creating a volcanic armor. He sends it all in a powerful surge toward his opponent. At the same time, the icy flows move ever closer to the fire. The brutal collision occurs. The volcanic armor explodes, violently shaking the surrounding space. Spectators in the stands, even protected by magical barriers, feel the impact. The head of the Blue Tower and the Academy professor continue watching calmly from the balcony. Some spectators even lose their magical hats due to the blast recoil. Amid the whirlwind, the young man rushes forward, bending his knees and placing a hand on the ground. He prepares for another strike, thinking this is his limit and his strength is nearly gone. He looks at his rival with a grimace, fearing that, if she survives this attack, he will lose in the dust rising after the explosion. A female silhouette with a staff appears. Gritting his teeth, he realizes he failed. Blushing, she turns with a gentle smile and asks his name. He widens his eyes and replies that he is Theodore Miller. Watching her silhouette approach, he says she can call him Theo without strength. He crouches and says she can do whatever she wants. She calls him by his short name and shyly lowers her head. Holding the staff, she suggests that next time they should go for a walk together. He is stunned by the request, and drops of sweat run down his face. The girl's magical artifact slips from her hand. She collapses on the ground, exhausted, with the staff beside her. The announcer raises her fist excitedly, shouting that the winner of the student tournament has been decided. Vince feels great pride from the victory. Blundell, for his part, can't stop smiling, happy that his student has found a friend. Theodore Miller, in disbelief, watches the colorful confetti fly around him. He smiles in relief as he confirms his victory. Then he raises his fist in the air, celebrating his huge achievement. His clothes were left tossed on an old couch. Theodore was bandaging his hand, thinking about his opponent in the tournament. He acknowledged the opponent's strength and smiled faintly. Punching his fist, he remembered he wasn't as strong as he thought. Sitting beside him, Vince watched silently. He reached out and suggested celebrating the victory. Boy lifted his head and said it still felt like a dream. With a slight smile, his friend asked if he thought he could stand. The young man leaned on the couch while the other grabbed a suit. Helping him dress in formal wear was a new experience for the mage. Carefully, he examined his companion's appearance. With a smile, he stood still, hair combed, wearing an elegant suit. Embarrassed by the formal clothes, he complained, ignoring the complaints. Vince simply told him to endure it until the ceremony. Question came: why was Vince also wearing a suit? The answer was direct: there were rumors that the king might be present. Therefore, formal attire was essential. At Pentrio Square, the red carpet LED to the ceremony podium. In the middle of the crowd, the young man appeared restless. Beside him, Vince asked if he was okay, and despite the affirmative answer, the nervousness was evident behind his friend. He watched the gathered mages. The concern about the possibility of the king appearing was clear. Many waited in the stands, and the atmosphere was full of anticipation. The massive gate opened before them, and the boy realized the audience was filled with important figures. Sweat ran down his face, revealing his anxiety. While Vince was excited to see so many bureaucrats gather, even the three most powerful families were there. As the candidates, including the young man, climbed the podium with their hands behind their backs, tense with trembling lips, he struggled to maintain composure. In front of so many distinguished names, Sylvia leaned in curiously and glanced at him discreetly. Embarrassed, she turned her face away, but then looked again and smiled. He winked at her and his mood lifted. He realized that worrying wouldn't help at all. When the speaker began to talk, he turned his head in alert. From the open gate emerged the majestic figure of King Kurt. He walked confidently along the red carpet, soldiers at his side at the podium. He wore a black suit and a yellow coat. He scratched his beard while observing the candidates attentively. Everyone bowed in respect to the manner. Kurt greeted Blundell casually, recalling their last meeting 3 months ago. Blundell, nervous, responded. The king remarked that if he hadn't missed the meeting, they would have seen each other sooner. Coughing discreetly, the other mentioned his vacation. The sovereign closed his eyes and questioned the effort of raising Sylvia, asking if she had been hidden for 10 years. Embarrassed, Blundell discreetly turned to Vince. An assistant announced that the names of the winners would be revealed. Kurt pointed to himself and declared that he would announce them personally. Lowering his head, the young man thought about the king's love for theatrics. The first award went to the representative of the water tower. The man in a blue hat thanked him and stepped down. Sylvia was called and confidently stepped forward. Watching her, he asked if she was blunt. Undle, a drunk as his disciple. She confirmed that she was the king, announced that she would receive 100 coins and the title of baroness. Receiving her prize, she thanked him, stating she was a student of the Blue Tower. Then it was the young man's turn to be called forward. Hurd declared that he would receive 200 coins, a magic bracelet and the title of baron. He began to thank him, but was interrupted by a gesture for silence. Surprised, he stayed quiet as the king said that with effort, he could earn a promotion on his own merit. He took the Jack Frost staff and brought it to his face. Grateful, he and Sylvia kneeled before the highest authority. Kurt smiled and scratched his beard. Clearly pleased, he extended his arms and spoke about the borders of the kingdom of Melter. He said that youths like them were vital against the Andres Empire. He ordered the magic community to cultivate more talents. He shouted, asking if everyone understood the decree. The crowd responded in unison, confirming the order after the ceremony. The boy ate too much, satisfied with the banquet. Vince praised the food and he agreed. Seated, they exchanged glances and gestures of approval. He laughed and smiled, feeling that it had been a great day. His companion was also satisfied, smiling quietly until suddenly, gluttony called out to the boy. Starving, it demanded food or threatened to eat him. He grabbed a red-covered book to feed it. The creature devoured the books, turning them into magic sand. With that, the young man learned the sandstorm spell. He also absorbed cold resistance magic. All the knowledge flooded into his mind with intensity. After devouring the books, Gluttony asked what he wanted. The boy looked at him, his eyes hidden under the shadow of his hair. But soon he said it would depend on how he answered. Theodore asks Gluttony why his speech changed so suddenly. The creature, confused, hears the comment about the strange pauses it had made. He explains that thanks to the many consumed artifacts, he overcame his stutter, though it still wasn't enough to evolve. The young man frowned, surprised that such a thing was possible. With his tongue out, the little monster claims it was just recovering its abilities. The mage looks at him seriously, wanting to ask another question. Not understanding the being, asks what he wants to know. With a sad look, the boy questions his own eyes. Gluttony mocks him, sticks out its tongue and makes a joke, while he and Vince, surprised, look away for a moment, trying to explain the joke. It is interrupted by a shout, saying it was already understood. The young man asks if he could transfer his question to someone else. Finding it curious, the creature says he's the first to ask that. Standing in the boy's hand, it answers that there's no rule against it. Vince approaches and comments that there was no objection to the question. With a curious look, he asks if he can call it gluttony. The response comes calmly. He can call it whatever he wants. After hearing it, he understands and says he'll keep it respectful. Scratching his chin, he asks if language and magic are connected. The little one begins to speak about the ancient times of the elves. He explains that elves Dragons and demons used magic with different names. Humanity born without powers stole abilities from other races. They copied the elves, the dwarves, and even performed demonic rituals. Thousands of years later, they created the first magic circle. From there, the first human mages began to emerge. The being says, the question was far too broad for a single lifetime to answer. Vince tries to simplify by asking about human language, but the answer indicates the information is still too vast. Dissatisfied, he asks, why ancient and modern languages have different magical effects. With eyes closed, the little monster says he will explain an important point. He says, magic is like making a request to the magical forces of the world. So he listens carefully and finds the concept plausible. The little monster explains that language serves to persuade the world, and the more powerful the mage, the more the world responds to their voice. The statement is clear. Ancient languages are more powerful than modern ones. Scratching his chin, Vince still doesn't fully understand the principle. Gluttony says language is a contradictory medium by nature. The professor watches closely from behind his glasses. The boy sits up straight like a dedicated student, while Vince remains beside him listening with interest, thinking he understood the archaic language. By comparing it to the ancients, it's nothing unless you reach a level where you can use it daily. Curious, Gluttony asks which archaic language he was studying, and it turns out to be Valkyrie. An illustration appears when it's said, there's a record of this language being used by the Valkyrie Empire during the age when magic was at its peak. Upon hearing this story, Vince wonders about the intonation. The answer is that the Valkyrie language doesn't show its true value unless all 8 syllables are pronounced harmoniously. While adjusting his glasses, he notes the same applies to any other language. Tones and expressions used popularly become the established norm. Looking down, he knows the world also follows that flow. As a sign of love toward mages, noticing something, Theodore glances to the side where Vince appears, completely different from usual. Depressed by his mastery of the 6th circle. Surprised, he opens his mouth just enough for a mosquito to fly in. Confused, he realizes his teacher has broken through the wall of the 6th circle. Seeing this scene, he feels proud to have witnessed it directly. Looking at his hand, he asks what just happened, and tries to find out if the little monster is about to sleep sleepy. Let me asks not to be ignored so quickly. Curious, the young man asks what he means, puzzled that the creature hasn't fallen asleep as usual after eating. Sticking out its tongue, the little one says it will give advice to strengthen him, warning that at this rate he would die before unlocking all the seals. Nervous, the boy begs him to tell everything. Part of his hair turns purple, and he observes this seriously. Gluttony promises to teach a hidden function, without asking for anything. In return, he explains that gluttony means absorbing books, and using their abilities. The second function is absorbing rare books. The third is storing spells and knowledge directly in the brain. Attentively, the mage listens as everything is revealed. He bites his lower lip, reflecting on what he hears. Without averting his gaze, he watches the other speak with mischief. He raises his hand with a creature at head height, turns his face to it and asks what the problem is now. The little one softens again, lazily falling back asleep while grumbling about his master's paranoia. Vince approaches while the other remains seated, hands in his pockets. The little monster reveals a quick method to gain strength. Improve the quality of the books offered. The words hit the mage like lightning. He is accused of only having given basic books, and elemental magic ones, never rare ones. Embarrassed, he smiles awkwardly and admits it's true. He remembers having given only 2 rare books to Gluttony recently, which turned to sand and were absorbed. He crosses his arms, realizing that arguing would be pointless, and concludes that to evolve, he'll need to offer truly valuable works. His gaze becomes serious as he considers the hidden function. Even with doubts, he recognizes the trade-off is worth it. He places the hand with the creature on the table, determined, while his friend positions himself beside him, paying close attention to the instructions. Sticking out its tongue, Gluttony says the key to activating the function is close. Confused, the boy asks what it is. He is stared at, and the required condition is named. Without immediately understanding, he just stares at the creature. Suddenly his face contorts with various emotions. With trembling lips he yells, shocked, asking why that was necessary. With a hand resting on the head, the mana began to dissipate gradually. The young man still seated beside him, attentively followed the whole process alongside the professor. When the hand was removed from the boy's face, the goal had finally been achieved. Soon after, the student congratulated the master, for he had reached the rank of Sixth Circle Mage. In gratitude for the support received, the two clasped hands in a gesture of mutual recognition. Professor then commented that had he pursued that path alone, it would have likely taken 10 years of research, or more, to reach such an achievement. The boy, smiling, said the master was over, praising him. The key, and a session with gluttony was so peculiar that perhaps only the archaeology department will understand it in a few centuries. Still holding the disciple's hand, the professor reflected on how that connection felt, like a reward after a long, hopeless wait. While looking at his own hand, Theodore wondered if that would be the right moment to share something important with the boy. Remembering gluttony, he reflected on the fact that it had considered devouring the spatial pouch. Memory made him question how rare the pouch was, since gluttony demanded an item impossible to obtain under normal circumstances, and created with magic above the sixth circle. That's when the image of a shadowy figure emerged, as selling such items was forbidden, and replacements were only allowed in cases of proven loss or destruction. This thought led him to reflect on the unusual nature of gluttony, whose insistence on devouring various precious items seemed increasingly strange. Looking to the side with curiosity, the professor asked the boy if something was bothering him, which left him a bit bewildered. Then he commented that he felt like he was forgetting something, and half confused stated that it was irritating. Trying to hide his own frustration, he said he would try to find another method, and might search for lost or stolen items. Turning to the boy, he said that actually there was something important he intended to say, but ended up forgetting because of everything that had happened. Upon hearing this, the boy stared intently at the professor, wondering what it could be. Closing his eyes, the professor said he didn't need to feel pressured about it. Reaching out his hand, he called for Theodore and Millie. As he walked toward him, he asked if he would accept becoming his first disciple. Still seated, the boy was stunned by the proposal. Smiling, he replied that it was exactly what he had also been thinking. As he wanted to reclaim his name, his eyes widened upon hearing that the professor wanted to formally register him in his lineage. Lowering his head, he asked if he was sure about the decision, if he was truly comfortable with someone like him. Hearing the doubt, the professor said it was normal to feel shallow in moments like this, but that it shouldn't stop him. He also stated that it wasn't his fault, and that disciples often represented the hope of unexpected gains. Biting his lips, the boy listened as the professor said he could trust him. Smiling, Vince said that he had wanted to ask that question for a long time. With a more serious expression, he reflected on the great burden that decision represented. Soon after, they both sealed the contract. The boy declared that he was excited to work with the professor. The other replied that from now on, he would no longer be just a professor. Then they looked at each other and declared that from that moment on, they would call each other Master. The scene then shifted to another location, an imposing structure before them. Several red posters caught their attention, and the boy commented that it looked interesting. The professor replied that the annual magic attack promoted by the Red Tower also looked promising. Indignant, Vince stated that he personally didn't want to go there. He explained that the place was frequented by people who believe life was just about destroying everything. At that moment, someone called out, asking if they were Vince Heidel and Theodore Millie. Sighing, a girl introduced herself as Mellows from the Blue Tower, saying she was looking for the two of them. While showing a paper, she apologized and asked if they could accompany her. She explained that the Tower Master had summoned them. The scene shifted again, now to the Blue Tower, surrounded by a thick fog. Walking through damp corridors, the two moved side by side. During a walk, the boy asked why everyone was looking at them like that. Vince replied that it was because of the event from the previous day, which had made him famous. Raising his head, the boy asked if there was anything to worry about. The professor stated that it would be best to simply ignore, because regardless of the approach, giving attention would only attract annoying parasites. Moments later, they climbed a spiral staircase and went through a door. Farther ahead, a figure awaited them, thanking them for arriving and saying he thought he'd die waiting. Running a hand through his beard, he apologized for summoning them so early. His eyes soon locked onto something they both felt, the blazing power radiating from Vince's chest. Please, the The master commented that the professor had finally overcome a barrier. Laughing loudly, he asked if Vince really thought he could deceive the master of the Blue Tower. Dazed Vince only gave a vague thanks. Blundell, seated, held a glass of drink. He soon turned his attention to Vince and started the conversation. He mentioned the numbers 932 and 1106. Looking sideways, he explained that this was the number of people purchasing information about Vince and Theodore Miller. With a firm gaze, Vince tried to understand the situation. Blundell then stated that, anticipating this, he made sure all their personal information was blocked. He said that only the Majesty, due to higher rank, had access to such data. Curious, Vince asked if he already knew all of this would happen. With his hands in his pockets, Wendell began pacing back and forth. With a dark expression, he stated that local politics were the real reason he left that city. He revealed his outrage that insignificant people had tried to target his disciple. Faced with this reaction, the boy was in shock, purifying the dense energy in the air. Blundell said there was no reason for so much stress. Sitting down, he declared that even as a Sixth Circle Warmage, he couldn't destroy politics with just his power. He knew that confronting the powerful head-on wouldn't be a wise choice. Realizing that Blundell had dispelled all the tension in the room, Vince began to sweat. Curious, he asked what the wise Tower Master would do in such a situation. With a serious expression, Blundell replied that he would crush and eliminate them all. He stated that once he reached the 8th circle, nothing else would matter. At those words, two were stunned. They never imagined he would say something like that. Raising his hand to his pocket, Blundell revealed he was joking in that, in any case, he had already prepared something. Holding a red card, he said it was a dispatch order. He stated that Theodore at least was still at a level considered low. He said he should at least avoid cleaning up messes. He didn't want to end up with that duty. Still, he pointed out, it was better than staying locked in his room until the end of the competition. He continued by saying he could do everything calmly, as he hadn't returned home in 5 years. He said he could use this mission as an opportunity to visit his hometown. He was pleased to see the boy start thinking about his city. What surprised Theodore was realizing that the mission's destination coincided exactly with Baron Miller's territory. On Blundell's desk were scrolls and writing tools. The room remained silent for a moment, but soon he offered the envelope with the mission. While explaining the situation, a mage had been sent to a cave in Miller 3 months earlier. Reading the order, the boy heard from Blundell that it wasn't a dungeon, just a regular cave. The young man interrupted, saying they had lost contact with the mage. This was confirmed, along with the note that they could rest in the apprentice's town. But if they found the missing mage, they had to bring him back. The mage looked at the master while holding the order with a smile. He accepted the mission thinking it would be easy. Blundell shouted that if the mage had severed the connection on purpose, it would be serious. They both were startled by the sudden change in tone. Snapping his fingers, the superior revealed he had found a partner for the mission. Sylvia partially hid behind the cabinet. She was glimpsed before being called forward. Wearing the Blue Tower uniform, she walked timidly toward them. She lowered her eyes and greeted her colleague. Blushing shocked, he backed up until hitting the cabinets. Blundell commented on the attention she received. The young girl shyly held his finger. The boy began to say goodbye, but was interrupted. The mage grabbed him by the shoulders, startling him. He said the girl was a child at heart with no social sense. He asked him to help her gain communication experience. Then came the doubt. Would it be appropriate for two young people to travel together? The man put his arm around the boy and said the girl only felt sympathy and curiosity, as she didn't even understand the opposite sex. Trying to listen in on the conversation, the girl made them both nervous. Blundell pulled the apprentice aside to continue the explanation. They arrived at a table with various objects. He then handed over a badge from the Magic Society. The item indicated a level 9 mission with a payment of 3 coins. The mage covered the badge and spoke of the responsibility of delivering it. The boy asked what the true reward was, and the answer was that with the badge, he would earn 100 gold coins. He couldn't take his eyes off the item. He thought that amount would support the Miller family for years. He remembered the poverty of the farm and the hunger of its people. Adding that to the 200 coins from the tournament could help a lot in Blundell's arms. He accepted, taking Sylvia along while she tried to follow them discreetly. Leaning backward, the mage patted his shoulder, making him nervous, and said it would be a great learning opportunity. The boy was apprehensive about how people would react to seeing them together. The girl smiled and showed 2 fingers, expressing her interest. The scene shifts to the outskirts of the capital. Beside the carriage, Vince was talking to Anna. He thanked her for the service provided, and Anna said she would do anything for a request like that. She got closer, but he asked her not to come too near. She smiled with drool dripping, enchanted and thrilled by the idea of marrying a 6th circle mage. The man was visibly uncomfortable with her behavior, not understanding his intentions. He partially turned his head and wished the disciple a good rest. With the capital in the background, he remarked that, after the competition, everyone could focus on magic, and warned them to take good care of their spatial pouch. He said that if it were lost, an investigator would be sent and he would be the one paying for it. The boy gave a strange smile, remembering that gluttony had devoured the item. Invisible sweat ran down his face at the thought. He hoped he wouldn't have to go to trial because of it. Placing a hand on his face, he promised to take better care of the item. The coachman asked if they were ready to depart. The young man walked past his master and the 2 exchanged farewells. The carriage set off, kicking up dust, while the older man remained standing. Watching from a distance, the vehicle sped down the road. Inside, the passenger rested his head on his hand. If they kept up the pace, they would arrive at Miller Barony in 5 days. Although a strange tension lingered between the 2 travelers. Even though he knew she didn't understand the opposite sex, he felt uneasy thinking. He leaned forward and asked if she liked elementals. She asked neutrally what those beings were, extending his hand. He summoned Mithra. A creature appeared in floating fragments of earth. Surprised, the young woman took Mithra into her arms. Charmed by its cuteness, she smiled. The mage smiled with relief upon seeing her act like a normal girl, thinking it would have been disastrous if she saw him only as a mage. Mithra tickled her, making her bend and wink. Day turned to night with the setting sun. The young man looked out the window. It was the 4th day of travel. When called by name, he turned to her and asked what her hometown was like. Crossing her arms, she answered simply and directly. She said her village was nestled between mountains and forests, with yearly harvests and occasional hunts. She added that life was simple, shared with neighbors, and concluded that fools like him lived there. She covered her smile with her hand and said, "It sounded like a good place." Closing his eyes, he smiled. Remembering the past, he looked out the window, eager to see his parents again. Suddenly he clenched his teeth as he sensed terrifying mana. The girl felt the magical power as well and became alert. The mage cast the Hawkeye spell. Outside, several lights flickered among the trees. A troll's foot appeared through the bushes. Armed monsters began emerging from the forest. Both looked out the window, shocked, as the boy opened his mouth, unable to understand where the creatures were coming from. Goblins stirred under the full moon, silently advancing toward the caravan. The young mage cast a serious look at his companion, who, confused, returned it. Then he ordered her to take the right. As he went left, a thunderous noise signaled the attack, and someone screamed that the monsters were coming. Leaping in mass onto the wagons, the creatures made them sway. An invisible force exploded between them, throwing them into the air. A wounded man groaned, and the mage grabbed him, shouting for him to wake up. After reviving him, he stepped back, dissatisfied with his sluggishness. He ordered him to tend to the others and take them to safety. The bald man with yellow glasses nodded seriously. The young man faced the army. Grinning goblins, kobolds licking their lips, and cruel orcs. Monsters surrounded the ruined caravan under the cold moonlight. Fortunately, he hadn't yet seen giant creatures or sensed necromancers nearby. He blew on his palm, conjuring a small flame. The flame quickly grew, lighting up the field around him. He directed magical energy to his fingers, forming a firewall with a gesture. He hurled the fireball upward, scattering sparks that struck the enemies. The creatures were consumed by the flames, and his shout demanded they burn to the end. He coldly analyzed them. They were fragile and calculated that with effort he could take down 1,000. A dull rumble echoed. Something big was coming. Heavy footsteps resounded, and the mage narrowed his eyes at the approaching danger. The troll leaped directly at him, wielding a massive weapon. The landing raised a cloud of dust. He faced the monster, collapsed on the ground. He sat up, panting, locking eyes with the enraged beast. The creature raised its weapon and he defended himself with his arms. He thought that magic bullet wasn't effective against the undead. Then he countered with a magical attack, shaped like a blue dragon's head. The troll staggered, screaming as it was hit by the spell. Droplets of water scattered in the air. A water serpent appeared, wrapping around the creature. The serpent suffocated it, freezing it into a diamond-shaped ice prison. The mage watched in awe at his companion's magic. She stared back with confidence, holding her magic staff with authority, recognizing the spell as a level 4 control magic. He praised her with a smile. She smiled back, saying her grandfather used to say the same thing about her magic. He reflected in silence, placing his fist to his lips. Deep in thought, he asks his elemental if she could use something similar to the girl's spell. The small creature clenches her fists and lets out an affirmative sound. The ground begins to tremble. A colossal worm made of stone and earth emerges, roaring from beneath the ground. The mage extends his hand and recognizes it as a worm. The observer is enchanted by the gigantic creature, literally salivating. The monsters around stare in horror at the summoned being. She asks if he can really control it. Smiling, he asks the elemental if she heard the question. The worm rises even higher, launching dirt and stones from its body. Mage, sitting on a rock, just watches unmoving. The girl blushes at the absolute control he has over the creature. He states he is the creator of the beast, declares that the worm is commanded by Mitra, and sends it into battle. The creature charges forward, rapidly crushing goblins beneath its weight. He says controlling it is not hard at all. It slams into the ground, creating waves of stones and roots. Both goblins silently watch the devastating attack, leaving several destructive trails in its wake. From a distance, the two observe the damage. The effort to control the creature exhausts the caster, who begins to tremble. Sylvia praises the feat, saying he crushed the dead. Looking to the side, she runs to the mage, who is lying on the ground drenched in sweat. Worried, she shakes him and asks if he's okay. He thinks he overdid it but is proud to still be standing. He promises himself that next time he'll do even better. He begins to regain consciousness. Looking around calmly, he reflects that he still has much to learn and must not rush. A man appears among the trees waving. Both of them look at him, surprised, as he asks if the monsters have been eliminated. The mage replies yes, but warns that more may appear. The bald man nods and says he'll carry out the orders immediately. Sitting in the caravan, the young man thinks about the undead and tries to remain calm. It's concluded that the number of monsters indicates the recent arrival of necromancers. The sun begins to set and he remains hunched in silence. He thinks that even far from the barony, the Baron must have heard about the chaos by now. The caravan moves on, and the windows begin to glow with the evening light. He uses the eagle eye technique to observe the road. A mental map appears, with 5 hills between them and their destination. He realizes they've already passed 4. He opens his eyes and tells his companion they're almost there. She asks if they've arrived and he confirms with a look. He climbs onto the window ledge and watches the path carefully. He tells her that at his signal, she should stop the caravan. She agrees and asks about the plan. He replies that he will knock on the roof 3 times as the signal. He moves, opens the wagon door and grabs the roof of the carriage. Even at high speed, he uses a hygiene magic to stay in place. With eagle eye, he scans the horizon with heightened focus. He sees something in the distance that shocks him, and ends up looking even further. After realizing he saw something troubling, he covers his eyes with his sleeve, surprised by what he's witnessing in his thoughts. He mutters, "This is it." He observes a fierce battle up ahead. Undead and villagers are clashing with dead on both sides. He mentally questions whether the villagers are truly fighting monsters. The caravan moves quickly while he remains still sweating. One of the villagers grins wickedly as he wields his sword. Another bearded defender kicks a goblin and yells for them to choke on it. The mage realizes they're not ordinary villagers, but skilled mercenaries. He notes that thanks to them, the caravan can proceed safely. He runs to the bald coachman and orders him to head straight for the village. The man, surprised, asks what he plans to do. He runs to his companion's car and knocks 3 times. She opens the door and starts looking for him. Both look forward, seriously focused on the village. He comments that now it's their turn to act. He clasps his hands together and a fiery aura begins to envelop him. Focused, he growls and points his hands at the mercenaries in combat. He shouts triple arrow and fires a blazing spell. A fire arrow rises into the sky with a whistling sound. The fighters see dozens of flaming projectiles crossing the battlefield. His ally raises her staff and confident casts ice arrows. The spells intertwine, crossing the sky and sink. Some get startled and shout for no one to stand in the path of the projectiles. Others scream, confused, trying to understand why they're being attacked. The two stand side by side, confident in their combined magic. An explosion echoes from the fusion of fire and ice. The warriors watch in astonishment, but continue fighting with greater focus. One of them shouts that the mages are allies and on their side. Another reinforces that such strength brings hope for victory. Shouting, the fighters charge forward with more courage and energy. The mage shifts her stance slightly and shouts fireball. The young man appears and touches her staff, merging his magic with hers. Surprised, she stares at him as they both concentrate magical power together. They launch a massive fireball toward the enemy lines. The opponents barely have time to react. As the flames consume everything ahead, the explosion is enormous, with even distant observers left in shock. A monster attacks a fighter who pierces it with his sword. Another cuts down an enemy with an axe, stressing the importance of staying focused. A young man tells a veteran to stop complaining, and points in another direction. The sun begins to rise, tinting the sky with warm colors. The vice captain shouts that the monsters are retreating, and orders them to hold the line. Both watch the sunrise from the balcony, exhausted. He notes they were lucky to avoid the worst outcome. They collapse onto the roof of the caravan, sweating and breathing heavily. The mage looks to the sky. He notices something flying toward them. He sees it's not a bird but a wyvern, a winged monster. Shocked, he shouts that the night has returned to haunt them. He forms a gun shape with his hands and takes aim. Trembling with tension, he thinks he should use magic bullet, but it's already too late. Both raise their hands and shout, triple protection bracelet. A magic shield surrounds them as the creature approaches. Sweating, he feels the shield won't last much longer. He watches the situation and wonders about the two mages. The wyvern charges with its mouth open, ready to strike with a swift motion. He cuts it in half with his sword. The two maintain the shield. As the remains of the monster fall around them, the mage shouts in shock, asking what he just did. He smiles, saying he got rid of a thorn. He admits he didn't know where they came from, but thanks them for the help. His companion watches, surprised, as he says they should be the ones thanking him. He introduces himself as an investigator from the organization, and points to his partner, who greets them shyly, fastening his daggers back in place. He comments on how formal things are. Randolph reveals himself as the leader of the mercenaries, hired by the village called the Wandering Wolves, and formally introduces himself. He stares at the two seriously, apologizes for the situation, and says the place still isn't safe, so he'll need proof of their identity. Theodore's mouth opens in astonishment, as he realizes he's returning home after 5 years. A red-haired man with green eyes says he doesn't want to make a scene, but the situation is delicate. Randolph, hands on hips, suggests a quick ID check. Exhausted, the mage closes his eyes, agrees, and searches under his robe. He hands a scroll to the man, who immediately recognizes the Royal Investigator's seal. Upon reading the certificate, Randolph notices the surname resembles that of a local lord. The young man coughs and confirms with a smile. The local lord is his father. Sweating, the redhead realizes he made a mistake. He's standing before his employer's son. Smiling, he shakes the young man's hand and calls him young master. The hair complements the strength of the gang, and the leader invites him into the village. As they enter, the place is full of residents in white and brown clothes. Men rest under tents while the iron gate opens under the sunlight. A bald man and a blonde girl are startled to see him. She comments that he didn't have to return yet, since he was still studying. Albert, with tears in his eyes, shouts his name and runs to hug him. Albert hugs him tightly, saying how much he's grown over the years. Villagers gather, joyful at the return of the hometown boy and his companion. Sylvia blushes and lets go of the young man's hand. When a woman asks who she is, she then hides behind the noble young man. A girl with amber eyes suggests she's his girlfriend. Another remarks he didn't need to bring such a beauty there. Embarrassed, the young woman hides behind him as she hears them offering things from their shops. Someone calls out his name loudly, and he turns around surprised. A man with dark hair and loose clothes shouts his name from the crowd. He smiles warmly as he recognizes his father. The people applaud as the two embrace, emotionally crying. The man says he can't believe he's seeing his son again. The reply is simple: the most important thing is seeing him well. Father squeezes his shoulder, then says he wants to hear everything once they're home. At the house, the fireplace crackles as the young man stirs a soup with a spoon. Sitting at the table with Sylvia and his father, he enjoys the taste he missed so much. He thinks of all the stories he has to tell, but knows there's something more urgent. Closing his eyes, he makes resolving the entire situation his top priority. He asks if the undead began appearing a month ago, and the father confirms, saying the lumberjack was the first to notice the monsters. Suspicious, the son asks about the mercenaries and how they were hired. The girl watches seriously, while the older man touches his face and says he owes them a lot. He explains that the men came to fight bandits, but ended up finding monsters. He states that they've been protecting the village for a week, and that without them the situation would be dire. The mage finds it hard to believe mercenaries usually only act for money. Sitting in front of his empty plate, he reflects that it's strange to see them acting for free. He recalls the redhead with green eyes, and thinks he was too capable to be leading an ordinary band. Despite his gratitude, he considers the actions of the wandering wolves suspicious. Near the maid with a suitcase, he sees Sylvia coming down the stairs smiling. He leaves his companion with the maid and steps outside, closing the door with a sigh of relief. He looks at his palm and asks Gluttony if she can wake up. After a good nap, she wakes up. She appears sighing and smiling, saying that he's sensitive. Without replying, he smiles and asks how many books she wants today. Sticking out her purple tongue, she replies that she wants 2 or 3. He grabs a red book and a yellow one, saying he'll feed her now. The creature devours the books with her long tongue. Wrapped in magical energy, the system announces that the mage has acquired a 4th circle spell. Explosion. Gluttony grows several times in size after eating, and stares at her master with bulging eyes. He sighs in relief upon seeing that she's finished. He brings a hand to his mouth and says he's going to ask a question. He realizes the creature doesn't know what happened while she was asleep, so he explains the disappearance of an investigator and the presence of undead in the region. He comments about a sorcerer who seems to be controlling the dead. She listens and says something like that isn't normal. She lies down in his palm and suggests that there may be a grimoire in a cave. Shocked, the mage sweats at the thought and widens his eyes in disbelief. He asks if grimoires like her still exist. With a raised eyebrow, he asks if there are others like her. While staring at his own hand, he wondered if there were other mages like him. But he soon learned that neither the tome belonged to the 7 sins, nor was he part of that group. With a smile, she explained that the tome focused on commanding magic. Something he didn't yet understand was meant to be found, rather than speculated about. Sweating profusely, he thanked her for the offer, but quickly realized the creature wasn't acting normally. With her tongue hanging out, the creature said it wouldn't be a bad thing, since she could also consume magical tomes. It crossed his mind that, like enchanted books, tomes could contain information that might be absorbed and used to unlock her own seals. Ironically, he called the creature gluttonous, to which she replied that it was obvious it was in her nature. Upon hearing that her master agreed with the plan, she said he had made a good choice. Then she began the search, transforming into a blue lightning bolt that emitted even more energy outward. A few seconds later, she found the tome inside a cave, stating that something had already realized it was being searched for. Excited, Gluttony announced that she had found it. He saw the boy's expression and remarked that even though the tracking ability was only level 2, it had been powerful, though he believed the target had blocked. The boy furrowed his brow upon hearing that the tome had weakened its user. The creature explained that few tomes maintain a symbiotic relationship with their users, as most act like parasites, manipulating their minds and bodies. With her tongue out again, she concluded that the tome that had attacked him was probably that type, but either way, she had located it. Looking at the boy, she revealed that the cave was exactly the location he had been investigating, and suggested that he see it as the base of the tomb and its host. Since she had already answered the question, she said she was going back to sleep. When summoned again, she asked what he wanted now. Then she was asked if she could feed on undead, since those creatures were also made of magic. She considered the question offensive, and coldly replied that, if that were possible, she might as well have eaten the enchanted stones. The boy used to float. She went on to explain that once magic is released, those creatures are nothing more than corpses. They are not beings with their own magic or intelligence. Her expression shifted suddenly when she heard that there were exceptions, though she stated that she couldn't answer that unless asked formally, and then added that for now that was all she could say. The sound echoed through the room, and the protagonist turned to the side. Upon hearing knocks at the door, he replied that they could come in. Randolph entered apologizing for the interruption, mentioning that perhaps he was tired. The protagonist said not to worry, as he was already expecting to be found. Upon hearing that, Randolph showed surprise. Already seated, he commented that he was sure the protagonist was at the limit of his patience, as he knew he wasn't an ordinary person. With his arms crossed, he asked why he had stayed in that village, since his group would be able to cross the undead barrier without difficulty. The other, raising a hand to his head, asked what made him suspicious, saying he was merely acting in good faith. But as he touched his face, he admitted that he, too, would be suspicious if someone said the same thing in that manner. Crossing his arms again, he said he couldn't reveal everything, but he believed he could share part of the story, since the boy had insisted so much. He told him that long ago, an ancestor of his family went in search of a dark mage, arriving in another country from which he never returned. The relics he carried, a pair of twin swords, were also lost. Since then, his family spent years searching for those relics. Over time, they managed to develop an artifact capable of tracking them. Theodore, curious, asked which direction the artifact pointed, but was interrupted. The answer was that the artifact pointed precisely to the cursed mountain. As more than 100 years had passed, many were about to give up, especially because the artifact almost never reacted. But at a certain moment, when aimed toward the cursed horde of undead, it started to move in response to another question from the boy. He explained that the swords appeared to be ordinary, had the secret movements of fencing inscribed on them. With a more serious expression, he stated that, if he managed to recover the blades, he could likely become a master swordsman in 20 years or even 10. Upon hearing this, Theodore recognized that it was a real chance to surpass his own limits, and therefore he understood it how the other felt. Crossing his arms once more, Randall said he would only speak up to that point, because if the boy kept insisting, he would end up wasting time, and with that, men asking for help. The young master revealed that he hoped Randolph could assist in evacuating the citizens. Before even reflecting on the request, Randolph replied that although it was a good proposal, he would refuse. He explained that half the people would die during the evacuation. Raising his hand, the boy replied that in that case, the other half would survive. Closing his eyes, Theodore stated that regardless of how it was said, the result would be the same. Curious, he lowered his head, especially because the protagonist mentioned he would also make a proposal. Sitting in front of the man, he explained that it was more of a job. He took an object from his pocket and formally introduced himself as Theodore Miller, investigator of the Magic Society, offering a contract to the captain of the Wandering Wolves. Randolph's expression changed drastically upon hearing that. Placing coins on the table, he explained that the initial payment would be 100 gold, and at the end of the mission, 200 more would be added as both looked at the amount. He added that he intended to hire the Wandering Wolves for 2 days, totaling 300 gold coins sitting on the table. Randolph asked to hear the first details, leaving the young man intrigued, as he hadn't even accepted the money yet. Randolph commented that the amount was high, possibly leaving some leftover change. However, he said he wouldn't take part in a losing battle. He stated that if they were offering 300 coins, there had to be a plan. Looking intently at the contractor, he concluded that he was an extremely strange mercenary. Grabbing part of the money, he emphasized that a defensive war would be impossible. Defending oneself against an endless sea of tireless undead would be equivalent. The boy, staring at him, replied that it was precisely for that reason that they had to act. He said there was a way to change that situation. With determination, He declared that the only way was to organize a counterattack. Placing his hand on his leg, Randolph understood that he was referring to sending elite members to attack the enemy base holding his chin. He asked if that was really true. Looking firmly at the boy, he replied that he still wasn't fully convinced. Theodore then watched him with an even more serious expression. With his arms crossed, he stated that he knew it wouldn't be enough to persuade him. As he continued his explanation, he revealed that he already had the location of the Dark Mage. He said that if he could protect the vanguard alongside Sylvia, dealing with the necromancers wouldn't be such a difficult task. Showing curiosity, he asked why they would set out in the middle of the night when they could have attacked days earlier. He responded by saying that, in their case, the logic was different at night. When the dead gathered in the city, the enemy base became more vulnerable. Looking at the young man, he reflected on how he could be only 19 years old and questioned what kind of training the magic tower had given him. Theo's plan was to leave the wandering wolves to protect the city, while they investigated the enemy base. With some effort he continued stating that, if the attack failed, he would order the evacuation of all troops and villagers. He concluded by saying that regardless of the outcome, he would still receive 300 gold coins. Upon hearing this, the young man brought his hand to his chin, as if he had taken an unexpected blow. Realizing he had completely ignored his initial reason for refusing the mission, after pulling something from his pocket, he declared that he accepted Theodore Miller's job offer. He swore in the name of Marcus, the great god of war. The two sealed the contract, while a red smoke moved toward the protagonist's hand. Upon looking at his hand, he noticed a mark. The leader, holding out an artifact, remained silent, waiting for something curious. The young man asked if, in this type of subjugation mission, the spoils of the battlefield belonged to the client. Smiling mischievously, the other confirmed that he knew about a family amulet hidden near the arena where the Dark Mage was, and was certain of its high value. Sweating profusely, the young man thought his treasure was being used as bait, and that the plan had been orchestrated from the start. Raising his finger, he declared that since he had already received 300 gold coins, he wished to make an initial offer for the amulet. The scene shifts to the outside, where night begins to fall. Smiling with crossed arms, he commented that he managed to recover 200 gold coins. Randolph kept his treasure, and everyone ended up benefiting behind him crying. Another character protested, asking how he had the nerve to say everyone had won, despite that all the fences were in place and the taxes were in effect. Even if twice as many enemies came that day, compared to the previous one, they believed they could hold them off with ease. The sun in the distance was drawn closer to the horizon. With his eyes closed, he pondered how a mage like him could have built such a structure in less than a day. Looking back, he saw Sylvia stretching while drinking coffee. He asked if she had just woken up with a smile on her face. She replied that it had been a long time since she had taken such a good nap. The three waited anxiously for sunset to begin preparations. Taking another sip of coffee, the young man knew that night would be long. Moments later, the moon was already shining in the sky, and the monsters were heading to war. The bald man, observing the enemy troops, commented that just looking at them made him tired, while another behind him said he had heard the screams, and felt the same with his arms raised. Randolph declared that this would be the final day. With a smile, he wished his comrades good luck, and said he intended to enjoy that dreadful night. Before sunrise, everyone raised their weapons, excited about the upcoming battle. Moments later, they were face to face with the enemies, ready for war elsewhere. The three characters were gathered. Theodore used his weight reduction skill, while Sylvia activated her mana concealment technique. Crouching down, he declared that it was finally beginning, and asked if the others were ready. Both looked him straight in the eyes, and confirmed that they were prepared. As he picked them up in his arms, he focused to use his ability. Sparks began to appear around him right after. He took flight at incredible speed, leaving trails across the battlefield. The two impressed were moved to tears when they realized how fast aura users could move without using magic. They quickly flew over the enemies. Looking back, the young man stated that from that point on, he could follow Theodore's instructions. Theodore promptly indicated the direction, 40 degrees to the left, until they reached a wall. Upon hearing the details, he activated his ability again. Upon reaching the destination, they landed still holding the two. He announced they had arrived. While one of them was vomiting, He asked to be put down observing the scene. He commented that he had forgotten how light they were, standing ahead of the others. He declared that before entering the cave, he would use his detection spell. With his hand on his forehead, he activated his ability and channeled mana. A passage appeared before him. His eyes closed in concentration. Suddenly a monster figure appeared behind him. The creature's finger struck his face. With his hand over his eyes, he heard the question if he was all right. As he recovered, he assured them that he was. He reflected that although he had only scanned with mana, the sensation was suffocating. He concluded that it would be very dangerous if they didn't defeat the monster quickly. With his hands still over his eyes, he stated with certainty that the creature was there. Mana was being emitted around the cave to light the area. He activated his light spell. The two followed him through the darkness. The fire lit up his face intensely. Noticing movement ahead, he asked everyone to wait. Already in combat stance, Randolph asked what that was before them. The silhouette of a monster appeared. Soon a skeletal figure called them miserable rats and claimed they would never leave that place alive. He ordered its subordinates to attack. With the flames reflecting on his face, the protagonist remarked that they had arrived at the right time. Wielding his twin swords, he said he knew that even enemies could feel fear. Casting his fire forward, he declared that the time had come to charge with everything. Flames burst from his hands as he observed an enemy protected by a barrier. Giant corpses rushed toward the firelight, charging at them before they could be reached. He hurled a fireball directly at the monsters. Randolph watched the undead burn, sabers in hand, alert to the situation. He ran into battle after seeing the magic. Thinking the boy was in trouble, a barrier separated the trail from the undead, and another burst of fire, magic, lit up the cave. The silhouette of the mage appeared in the flames, and Randolph concluded only the wounded remained. He asked Sylvia to ventilate the area, and suggested a break while there was still air, and asked about her mana. The girl cheerfully said she still had 80% of her energy. The leader confirmed that the swordsman was also fine, and could still fight with a smile. Randolph conjured fire on his fingers and offered to move forward. Guiding the trio through the dark cave, Theodore lit the path with his magic. He recalled that the passage was 40 meters long, and realized they should have already passed it. A grim thought hit him, and he looked at the fire in his hand with concern. He shared a plan with Randolph, who laughed. Confused by the proposal, he asked Randolph to scratch the wall with aura, and the other agreed to try. The saber slashed deeply into the stone, shaking the surrounding area. The cut vanished suddenly, leaving no trace. Shocked, Randolph saw the stone intact with no sign of the strike. Theodore confirmed his suspicion and said seriously that this was already expected. He revealed with concern that they were inside a dungeon, and examined the surroundings. A blue glow caught his attention and left him completely intrigued. An image of ghosts appeared on the cave wall, which he suspected were specters in battle stance. Randolph regretted not bringing holy water. The mage grew worried upon seeing his companion ready to fight. Randolph charged forward furiously, saying there was no other choice and that he would go first. Theodore extended his arm firmly, ordering him to stay back. With blue light on his palm, he began casting his spell. Randolph, gritting his teeth, decided to trust the young master and stepped back. A terrifying cluster of ghosts pressed forward. With their presence, the mouth of gluttony opened in his hand, beginning to devour the specters. He concluded that no predator fears its prey, and absorbed them without hesitation. He extended his hand forward, and ordered the grimoire to consume everything around. Gluttony kept devouring without stopping, consuming the cluster completely. More messages appeared, listing the absorbed ghosts and undiscovered abilities. He realized that although he couldn't absorb the dead, exceptions like astral bodies existed. Confused, Randolph asked what he was doing with the specters. Sylvia, surprised to see the technique performed before her eyes, was amazed and asked Theodore to teach her as well. Embarrassed, he was grateful that neither of them had seen the full secret. With a mischievous smile, he considered showing a fake pendant as a disguise. A strange tremor occurred and everything turned red, making him anxious. Scarlet mist descended and the trio screamed in fear. Not understanding what was happening, they all looked up and saw red cracks forming on the cave ceiling. A sculpture emerged wrapped in red mist, radiating magical energy. He deduced that this sculpture had been the source of the dark mana. All along, blue energy rose from the figure, spreading like a mist of light. A creature burst from the white structure, calling the trio cursed rats. The screen tore, revealing the face of the creature, threatening them with certain death. It said that if they had come earlier, they could have prevented the creation of its new body. Now that it was complete, it declared that only death awaited them. It screamed, tearing the last bits of white matter from its body. The creature stood proudly, and Theodore recognized it as the Elder Lich. Gritting his teeth, Randolph questioned how the Lich had gotten there, then asked the mage if there was a plan to face. Theodore explained that a regular Lich dies with its body, but an Elder Lich does not. He said the life vessel had to be destroyed, or else it would always return. Randolph commented with frustration that an immortal enemy was extremely difficult to defeat. With all three looking on, he stated that he would search for the vessel and ask them to distract the Lich. The sorcerer changes his mind. Instead of killing them, he wants to use them as servants. He brings his hands together in a threatening gesture and looks at the mage. He decides to spare the boy, saying he wants to use him in experiments. With sarcasm, Randolph remarks that at least the sorcerer has good taste, while Sylvia, visibly irritated, questions who he thinks he is to capture him. The Lich concludes that it will be difficult to adapt to the new body. Theodore's power is special. He wonders why the young man is still only at the 4th magical circle. Staring at him closely, the mage decides he'll deal with that later. The Lich seals a spell and makes the young man disappear mysteriously. His body trembles and he looks at his own hand, not understanding what just happened. The dungeon distorts, red cracks glow and spread across the walls. Sylvia screams desperately, calling for him in panic. Randolph also yells loudly, calling the young master in despair. The sorcerer maintains the seal with his hands together. Murmuring strange sounds, they both remain motionless before the rift, calling out insistently for the one who disappeared. Sylvia, overtaken by fury, demands to know Theo's fate. The creature, in an emotionless tone, responds that from the moment the parents were sent to that place, they gave up their lives, and therefore the only thing awaiting them now is death. With a motion of his hands, he expresses his wish for his dormant servants to awaken. In response, a crack opens in the ground, and his arms point forward, until a figure slowly emerges from the earth kneeling. The entity wields 2 swords, keeping its face covered with a white cloth. Witnessing the scene, Randolph observes carefully and immediately recognizes what it is. The creature, thinking aloud, comments that the opponent's sword techniques seem incredibly familiar. Grinding his teeth, he orders the opponent to climb into his mouth. Taking a combat stance, he declares that there's no more room for words, and that he intends to tear him apart with his own strikes. While facing the young man, he claims to sense a deep connection between him and the servant that belongs to him. However, he suggests that perhaps the boy might be able to kill him, given his reputation as the disciple of a sword master. Overcome with fury, he bites his lip and insists that the enemy's skill doesn't matter. Positioning himself for battle, he announces that he intends to eliminate him right there before him. The creature also prepares for the clash. Observing the scene, he remarks that such arrogance can only lead to one outcome: mutual death. The young man's eyes fill with determination, while his opponent watches him with his face still covered. The Elder Lich comments that humans possess a curious instinct to challenge opponents they clearly cannot defeat. Casting a sideways glance, he ponders that despite this, what truly matters is not logic, but the feeling coming from the depths of his host's heart. Looking at the girl beside him, he reveals that this host carries a deep sense of inferiority in relation to the young woman, knowing that she is the beloved disciple of Brendel, the Blue Tower's master of that generation. He concludes that the boy's discomfort stems directly from her. Upon hearing those words, the young woman questions what exactly he's insinuating. Smiling sinisterly, the creature wonders aloud whether she might be searching for the host of the Blue Tower, the mage they had lost contact with. Upon hearing this, the girl's expression shifts to fury and she clenches her fists, tightly lowering her head. She begins to mutter disconnected words as if talking to someone else. Still listening to the being, she claims not to understand his insinuations. Gripping her staff firmly, she declares that she will defeat him, and demands the return of her companion. The enemy smiles and states that she has admirable courage, having gone so far as to accept his challenge. Meanwhile, elsewhere on the field, Randolph is engaged in a fierce duel with the newly emerged swordswoman. His face shows the effort demanded by the battle, until he finally manages to parry one of the attacks. Blocking it with his sword, he follows up with a counterattack, unleashing a series of consecutive blows. However, in the blink of an eye, the adversary appears behind him. A bluish aura begins to expand. The moment he turns around, she rests her sword against her arms and positions herself to deliver a new strike. Without hesitation, the monster charges swiftly toward the young man before her. As she approaches, she leaps, dodging the creature's attack. Still in midair, she prepares to strike back with her blade. In the next moment, when she lands, the swordsman is no longer before her, until he reappears right in front of her, ready for the next clash. The two stare at each other for a brief moment, then cross swords again, even struggling to defend against the enemy's attacks. The young man realizes that there's not a single opening, not even now that the opponent has become an undead. With a focused gaze, he acknowledges that if he makes any mistake, he will die instantly. He decides he must find the source that sustains the creature and eliminate it as soon as possible. However, something catches his attention. As he observes the opponent's sword, he notices a distinct mark. Looking downward, he says the name Clovis, belonging to one of the 10 most powerful families of the Andres empires. There was a time when that lineage proudly held one of the seats among the 7 imperial swords. The scene returns to the moment when the two crossed blades once again. Creature jumps back and then prepares to launch another attack. While remaining still, the young man reflects that what stands before him is exactly what he was searching for, as he suspected the undead was his ancestor. Unlike humans with limited vitality, undead can keep fighting indefinitely, as long as they receive a constant flow of magic. Additionally, it was a master swordsman, which made the fight even more dangerous the longer it lasted. By a narrow margin, the young man manages to dodge the strike that nearly hits his face. The red blade passes closely by his neck. Without hesitating, he throws his body to the side and tries to counterattack. Next, he lands a direct blow to the creature's head. Seeing the strike land, he smiles, believing that he will finally deliver the finishing blow as an undead. The creature shouldn't be able to move for a while. However, its eyes suddenly widen. Its expression changes visibly. Once again, the enemy appears before him, even after being decapitated. Staring into the being's eyes, he tries to understand how that was possible. Randolph analyzes the enemy cautiously, wondering if the head could be the weak point of an undead. He watches the monster shrouded in mist, and decides the battle can no longer be postponed. With conviction, he declares that he must destroy the creature's source of unimaginable power. He attacks and quickly pulls back, freezing to better observe his opponent. He realizes that the undead maintains the technique of a master swordsman. The monster's body glows with streams of red aura and a stench of rot. Surprised, Randolph acknowledges that even in ruin, the enemy performs techniques with perfection. He concludes that the monster is a reflection of a swordsman from over 100 years ago. He smiles ironically and mocks the enemy's aged appearance. He calls an ancestor and mentions the fall of the heirs of the Clovis family. With seriousness, he says his family was destroyed because of that enemy, and with sorrow he acknowledges that even the undead can be victims. He suggests that the royal decree was merely a pretext to eliminate the Andreas family. He tilts his head and wonders if the undead regretted obeying the emperor. He observes the genuine rage in the creature's eyes. With his sword in hand, Randolph says he will give the old man a chance at eternal peace. He asks him to accept death and finally rest. The undead remains still, and Randolph is surprised by his restrained reaction. The enemy lowers his finger with a confused expression, while Randolph gets lost in thought. A red aura spins around the opponent's face. He bares his teeth, certain that he must strike first. The swordsman raises his wand, ready to seal the enemy's fate. As the undead begins to levitate, consumed by uncontrollable fury, Randolph charges at extreme speed to launch his attack. He delivers rapid strikes, his blade grazing the opponent's face. The monster blocks the blow with precision. Leaving him shocked, he tries to dodge, but the opponent remains motionless, continuing the assault. Randolph prepares to defend himself with his sword raised. Sparks fly from the impact of their clashing blades. Frozen, he wonders if he will die right there. He pushes away the dark thoughts and promises himself he will return. He decides to rip the enemy's sword away, even if he has to grab it with his hand. Memories flood in and he sees a woman sleeping deeply. A man approaches and asks if Randolph has already chosen who will stay behind. Raising his finger, the man states that only one person can be taken. By order of His Majesty. He touches the bed where the young woman sleeps. She murmurs something upon waking. The girl asks if she had told him not to wake her like that. Her best friend gets up from the bed and is shocked by the scene. A man bows respectfully, saying his name is Mary, the family butler. He states that the young woman now belongs to the family and will be trained as an imperial soldier. Randolph freezes his body, trembling with rage, and he swears that he will return. Steam escapes from his body as he accelerates to attack again. At incredible speed, he appears behind the enemy, ready to finish it as his blade approaches. He is struck by an elbow blow. Thrown to the side, he tries to recover as the undead begin to advance. With the weapon behind his back, the opponent initiates a new attack. The energy from the red ore envelopes the entire body of the monster. Randolph is once again thrown back after a powerful blow in midair. He crosses his blades to block the next attack. Passing the enemy, he clashes swords face to face with his opponent. Rage dominates his face and their eyes meet inches apart. His blade begins to crack under the pressure of the fight. The sharp sound of battle echoes across the field from above. Randolph drives his swords into the enemy's body and begins to fall. A powerful roar escapes his mouth as they both plummet. The undead are left in shock at the devastating scene. With immense strength, he restrains the enemy, grabbing his arms, smiling. He says that, after 100 years of waiting, he doesn't mind about victory. Blue smoke flows from the opponent's hands as he now kneels. Randolph stands beside him as purple clouds form in the sky. He lets go of his swords, allowing them to fall heavily to the ground. A new weapon appears in his hand. Drenched in blood, a faint smile forms on his face. Satisfied with the outcome, the undead begins to slowly evaporate, fading before him. He asks the opponent to rest in peace and calls him dear ancestor. The entire area is covered in red blood, creating a terrifying scene. Sylvia lies unconscious and Randolph tries to help her up. The elder, watching, acknowledges that he managed to defeat the swordmaster. Impressed, he says he will make the swordsman his subordinate. In complete darkness, the protagonist realizes he can't see anything until a flame lights up at the tip of his finger, illuminating the mysterious room. Lifting his head, he wonders what is going on in that place. Looking around, he notices he's in a completely sealed chamber. Worried, he concludes that it's the perfect secret hideout. A floating object catches his eye and he wonders what it could be. Surprised, he realizes he can't access all his magical power. And upon seeing the floating crystal, he assumes it's the dungeon's core. Shivering, he states that the mana trapped inside confirms his suspicion. He declares that the crystal is a true vessel of life. Sweating, he theorizes that the Elder Lich used his own heart to create the dungeon, enveloping his hands in flames. He accuses the enemy of being the evil behind it all. Focusing, he activates a flaming shield and forms a fire projectile. He believes that if he destroys the vessel, he can end the undead army. He throws the fireball at the dungeon's core, hoping it will work to his frustration. The attack causes no damage to the crystal. Irritated, he wonders why it wasn't enough. In his mind, an image appears of a swordsman and a mage using ancient techniques, and he recalls that only the aura of a master or a seventh circle mage can destroy it. He admits that his current level is not enough to damage the dungeon's core, and punches the ground, screaming in frustration at his own powerlessness. Looking around, he doesn't know where he is, and fears a collapse if he attacks the walls. In doubt, he wonders if he has enough strength to escape from there. Leaning on his arm, he freezes for a moment. Analyzing the situation, he raises a finger and considers using all his mana in one final attack, even if it costs in his hand. He crosses his arms, attempting to recreate the power of a legendary magic bullet. He reflects that his arms might not withstand the impact of the energy he wants to release. He decides it's his only option and assumes a combat stance. He forms a cloud of red aura, gathering all his power for a single shot. Intense sparks shoot from his hands as he prepares to destroy the undead. An image of gluttony appears in his mind, showing how zombies move through magic. And he remembers that without that energy, the undead would just be regular corpses. He thinks that gluttony does not consume zombies or ghouls, but devours specters looking at the crystal. He wonders if it's also a source of magic. With his fist clenched he freezes, waiting for any reaction from the object. Covering his face, he reflects on the vessel of life that grants immortality to the Elder Lich. He states that this heart perfectly fits the requirements of dark magic. Touching the crystal, he activates his appraisal ability. The system reveals that the seal crafted with dark magic imprisons the soul of Giovanni and is protected by a contract with the forces of darkness, making it immune to low-level spells. The system classifies the item as a magical treasure, capable of releasing great amounts of mana, and informs him that assimilation will take 3 days, during which part of its knowledge will be transferred. Smiling, the mage says he expected as much and summons the grimoire. Gluttony sticks out its tongue and says it had been eagerly waiting for this moment. Wrapping around the dungeon's heart, the devourer begins the absorption. He watches the vessel being consumed and awaits the result. The system reports that part of Giovanni's abilities has already been absorbed, although complete absorption will still take 3 days. However, something is already showing interest in him. The scene shifts to the Elder Lich attacking. Sylvia summons a magical shield to protect the group from the direct hit. Even protected, she feels the pressure of the magic and acknowledges the danger. Grabbing her staff, she realizes she has less than 30% mana left. The villain praises her abilities and says she would make excellent material. The mage hesitates, fearing she won't last long in that situation. The opponent attacks again, knocking her down with his overwhelming technique. Randolph charges at the enemy, shouting for him to vanish. Protected by a barrier, the villain acknowledges Randolph's strength and pushes him back with magic. She gets up and sees a green cloud of smoke spreading across the battlefield. The swordsman shouts for Sylvia to fire, while he distracts the opponent. She agrees with a nod and prepares her final attack. She summons the Lord of Frost Immer and channels his power with her raised hand. The villain sees a bright light and wonders if that is her final move. In battle stance, Sylvie uses the technique Silent Blizzard. The blow completely envelopes the enemy in a frozen whirlwind. Randolph celebrates, believing they have finally defeated him. Trapped in the ice, the opponent acknowledges their skill, but says this won't be the end. He states that when Sylvia's mana runs out and the ice melts, they will all die, not understanding. They both watch the disturbing scene before them. Completely exhausted, she says she's out of magic. Punching the ice, she ends up shattering it. As he walks, the ice block crumbles behind him. A glow intensifies in his hand as he says he will now end it all. Smiling, the Elder Lich declares that they are all now his eternal subordinates. He stretches out his hands and unleashes a massive wave of destructive aura. Randolph, in shock, wonders if this is how he will die inside a cave. Sylvia runs to him and activates a technique that emits strange sounds in the air. Suspicious, the enemy tries to understand the sound until he is covered in ice. His voice is no longer heard with the same intensity. Just above, a strong blue light shines brightly. Screaming, he calls the mage a pathetic worm. Trying to resist the technique, the ice prison begins to tighten, while the swordsman watches in silence. Streams of aura continue to leak from the ice barrier. Conjured by Sylvia, a fragment breaks off from the structure, leaving Randolph surprised. A mysterious glow appears in the sky, drawing everyone's attention. He assumes a combat stance and declares that the bloody space is unraveling. Worried, Sylvia turns and looks to the side, where the environment is surrounded by a cloud of red aura. The mage believes the plan was successful and hopes the two are safe, but as he clenches his fist, he's overcome by a feeling that something is still wrong. Realizing that the dungeon has been destroyed, he suggests the space will return to its original form, but suspiciously wonders if there is another hidden core in that place. Suddenly, a new dark aura tries to escape from behind him. He is shocked to see a book floating above the mist in front of him. He recognizes the presence of the aura in the mysterious grimoire, known as a magical tome, sticking out his tongue. He questions whether it is using spatial distortion, while the grimoire attempts to flee, but Gluttony interrupts, asking to be the one to handle it. Aiming his tongue at the book, he comments on the artifact's freshness. Trapped in shackles, the book tries to break free, screaming intensely. The mage is stunned to hear screams coming from inside the grimoire. The devourer shakes the book, laughing and mocking what seems to be a trapped consciousness. Still holding the book, he calls it insolent for daring to covet its user. Looking dead serious, he begins to say that even a mere being like it really thought it could make him a servant. A mysterious figure raises a hand and says he's changed his mind and wants to capture them alive. Theodore ended up assuming that was why he had been brought to that place alone. The system reveals that the grimoire houses the soul of Jerem, a necromancer of the 9th circle, known for allying with demons and turning any reader of the book into an undead. The system reports that the grimoire's goal is to perform a perfect resurrection, and being classified as legendary, it possesses the ability to transfer between 50% and 100% of Jerem's powers. However, there is a great risk of Jerem taking control of the user's body. To reduce this threat, the mage must unlock another seal of gluttony and increase his power. Terrified, he reflects on the disappearance of the 9th circle mages. 1,000 years ago, he becomes excited at the possibility of someone with that power dominating the world. Something catches his attention, causing him to momentarily look away. He asks Gluttony if it knows that it still can't eat the grimoire. Mockingly, the alley questions who said that, pointing out the high success rate, and asks if he truly believes he can control such a powerful grimoire. Gluttony replies yes and no, leaving the mage even more confused. Considers the possibility that this might be a secret function of the grimoire, but the other stares at him seriously and says he can't reveal anything more. For now, Gluttony warns him that in 5 minutes, the book will try to escape, urging him to hurry. In response, the mage calls the enemy a worm, and reveals he borrowed his master's spatial pouch. He fears that if the grimoire escapes, a new Giovanni could emerge in the future, and so he asks Gluttony if the contents of the spatial pouch will be lost upon being consumed. Gluttony assures him that nothing will be lost. The answer sounds vague. Determined, he hands the spatial pouch to his partner before he can change his mind. At that very moment, the absorption process begins. The pouches glow mysteriously. Amid the moment of consumption, the system reports that a hidden function of the devourer has been unlocked. Frozen with its tongue out, Gluttony reveals the newly activated ability. The system informs that it now has an internal inventory as a storage space. The previous owners called it inventory, and it can be renamed. Surprised, he notes that this function has ended up replacing the spatial pouch. Gluttony warns that the magical tome cannot be placed in the pouch, but can be temporarily kept in the inventory. He explains that once the book recovers, it will teleport out, and when asked if the inventory follows the same rules, Gluttony confirms it does not. He states that this internal space poses no risk of escape if the item does not have dimensional movement. The young man looks at his own hand and thinks that everything should be under control. Even so, he believes not even a grimoire could escape from that space. While explosions of aura erupt around him, he realizes his luck is not so great. Furious red aura consumes everything, rapidly causing the space to collapse. The absorption is completed and the place begins to fold in on itself. Dazed, the others see Theodore's body floating in the air. Sylvia runs to him and asks if he's okay, and if he wasn't hurt by the fall that happened. With a smile, he says the cave is about to collapse entirely, and suggests they save the emotional reunion for later, and get out of there as soon as possible. Everyone runs out of the dungeon trying to escape the rubble. Looking back, he sees that his plan succeeded. While running, he asks if they managed to retrieve his artifact, receiving a yes in response. Randolph realizes that, after much effort, he finally managed to hold on to the relic, which is surprising. He states that he is now close to reaching the level of Swordmaster. Running through the debris, he says he'll show his new strength later. Observing the dungeon's collapse, he reports that there is still time before total darkness. Our video ends here. If you enjoyed it, please like and subscribe to the channel. Until next time, bye-bye.